Hello there. Welcome to the IWS Podcast. I'm your host, RJ, and I have a wonderful guest with me today, the lovely Marissa McNeil. How are you doing, Marissa?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I'm glad to have you here. For those that don't know, this podcast is focused on mental health. And so what we're going to do is make sure we have a very in-depth discussion around all things mental health, and we're going to get some wonderful insight from a woman's perspective as well, and also get to learn a bit about you and your lived experiences. Sound good?
Yeah, I'm excited.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in because I'm sure the audience and myself are quite eager to learn more about you. So I always like to begin by talking a bit about our family upbringing, and understanding a bit more about how we see the world, how it ultimately shaped the way that we see things and we see ourselves. So if you don't mind beginning by discussing a little bit about what it was like growing up with your family.
Yeah, for sure. So my parents divorced when I was pretty young. I was 4, turning 5.
Okay.
So I grew up, they were remarried by the time I was 7, so I really grew up with 4 parents, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, they got remarried to other people?
Yes, sorry, remarried, new marriages, but they were all very active in my life by the time I was 7. So it was always, if we had a big family event, or I'd say like a graduation, all my parents were there. So I was really lucky. The divorce was amicable. It was really respectful, which I know is rare. So
Sure.
yeah, I was very lucky for that. And all my parents were involved all throughout my childhood. So, and it was just myself and my sister with 4 parents. So it was an interesting dynamic for sure.
I can imagine. Wait, an older or younger sister?
Older sister by age. And I don't say this to, she's not going to kill me for saying this, but I have kind of taken on the older sister role in our family. Even my parents, my cousins, my aunties, they would all say the same thing. Like, I'm kind of my sister's keeper. I've always been the caretaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But and I do think that is an interesting dynamic, like you said. We don't always see when families separate or they split up in that way that they're able to not necessarily just reconcile, because that in and of itself, can take a long time.
Right.
But to then get remarried and decide that we're all going to come together and kind of work as one big family unit, essentially.
Yeah, it was really bizarre. Especially because my parents separated when they were fairly young, like they were 28 to 29 and had 2 kids. And so I feel like they also didn't have a lot of support from their family, so they were kind of doing everything on their own.
Yeah.
So I think it's crazy that they were able to navigate like having weekly calls with each other to say, hey, how are the kids doing in school? Things that they were doing that I feel like are now becoming more common, and like this is the best way to co-parent. But back in the day, like, I don't know, I feel like that wasn't a normal system.
I think that's awesome, though, that you get to benefit from that unique experience. It's kind of like, that for anybody who would be going or the product of a divorced home, it's going to be inherently challenging for a lot of people, right? But in your case, you're saying at the same time, they very quickly were able to not only get into a new relationship and a new marriage, but then decide that they want to effectively co-parent together. So like you said, instead of just 2 parents, you actually had 4.
Yeah, bonus parents. And it was crazy because not only did I have like a good example of how, co-parenting can work and separation can work, but because of that, I never grew up with like fighting in the household. So I only have like happy memories of like parents getting along and now that I know, as an adult, knowing your parents as adults who had children, I don't know how my parents were ever together. Like, I cannot imagine them being in a relationship and getting along. So for me, it's like, wow, this was the best case scenario. I feel like I really came out on top of everything.
Yeah. No, I think even just being able to be surrounded by that level of support.
Right.
And seeing that even though things maybe don't go according to plan or however we maybe envision it in our mind, there's still a way for us to make this work, and especially be for the betterment of the children. Yeah. Meaning you and your older sister.
Yeah. And the fact that when they remarried, those step parents are still in my life today. So, my mom and my father were together for 12 years, which was significant, right? It wasn't a short amount of time. And now my mom with her current husband, my second dad, they've been together 20 years now or something. So, and my dad and my stepmom are coming up close on that as well. So it was kind of seeing 2 long-term significant relationships that all of my parents speak about so positively.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a blessing, because I think you don't always get to see that. And again, the purpose of discussing and trying to lay the foundation of the family is because that shapes, for the vast majority of us, how we see ourselves and sort of what we expect, when we get older. So if you're seeing a lot of that healthier dynamic between folks, even when things don't go according to plan.
Exactly.
I think that sets a really good tone for you and your sister. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Completely agree. Yeah. And my mom has always said that, my dad was the perfect person for her in that stage of her life. And as they were growing and kind of turning into their adult selves, they grew apart. And now my stepdad was the perfect person for her in this stage of her life. And I don't think that's normal to talk about it that way, especially from parents. And so for me, I even see my past relationships as being really healthy and beneficial for that stage of my life, and that they were still successful relationships. My mom, speaks of her marriage with my father as it having been a really successful, beneficial relationship. And I think we have this idea of like successful is that it would still be lasting, right? Like if it was successful, you'd still be together. And I don't necessarily share that same frame of mind because of that.
Okay. No, and I think that's a very intriguing way to think about it too, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't go according to plan in terms of I thought we would have longevity until somebody passes away.
Right.
But I've extracted so much maybe positive value and I've learned and I've grown as an individual, hopefully you have as well, that I would rank this a successful relationship, regardless of the fact that we are not going to continue in life together.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful reframe that we probably need to think about more often. Because I think a lot of us, that's sort of the expectation, regardless of whatever type of relationship it is.
Right.
I think we're supposed to stay together as long as we physically can.
Exactly.
But if we're okay with understanding that it might not go all the way, it might not go the distance, but what was I able to maybe learn about myself, learn about the other person? How do I treat one another, looking outside of myself? These are things that we talk about a lot on this platform. Because relationships are inherently complicated, because humans are inherently complicated. And I love having the opportunity to talk these things through, because even like what you just did, you brought a very refreshing perspective that a lot of us don't have the fortune of living through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree. And I do, a lot of my friends, their parents are separated. And even I would say my friends whose parents are not separated probably have the most complicated relationships. And my friends who their parents are separated, a lot of them say the same thing, to where they don't know how their parents were ever together. Like, it's probably for the best that they separated, but I don't think they have the same perspective on it as I do. And the perspective that I have is because of my parents. They really framed it that way. I would not have had this perspective on my own. It was really them preaching it through growing up, that you got bonus parents. I mean, one of the first things my mom said was 2 Christmases. And that was huge as a kid. I was like, oh, double the gifts, double the love. And that's how they just phrased everything. So
I like that phrase, bonus parents.
Yeah.
It's like a video game reference. No, but that does make sense though. I mean, and I agree with you. I think, for those that don't know, I don't know if I told you, but I'm also a father. My son's about to be 12 years old. So I think about that too. Like the things that you put out there as normal, right? And these are things that we say and we also just do. And you all and we all as children, we're just observing and kind of taking it all in. If I present these situations and these experiences to you, and it's just like, hey, this is kind of how it is, then you don't know any difference. You don't have anything to compare it to. So you're like, oh, okay, that's awesome. I guess I do get 2 sets of parents, and I'm just going to roll with that. Double the love.
Right.
And I think that is a really cool way to look at it, and not look at it as in we just failed at this, so now we're both going to live these separate lives irrespective of each other, when we both made these kids. So like our spouses inadvertently are and probably should be involved in their lives to some degree. Right. But it sounds like they did all that talking about beforehand maybe, and they decided like, yes, we're going to cooperatively do this together.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of that, and I will say, I think my sister and I had different experiences because I was younger. So she might have a slightly different perspective because she probably did hear some fighting, right, that I didn't hear at my age or remember. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. I was actually going to mention that I think for a lot of people, and I try to talk about this on this show, when we talk about co-parenting, the idea that to your point, sometimes situations aren't going to work out where we're going to stay together. Like, for example, I co-parent. Right. And so what I always want the focus to be is the child or children, depending on how many you have, because at the end of the day, like, we chose to make them and they didn't ask to be here and they don't know all the stuff that we got going on. So it is in their best interest to make sure we can find a coherent way to work together. Right, for the sake of them. We want to project positivity, encouragement, love, compassion, understanding. And essentially, once you remove like the emotional aspect of it, it is easier to work together. I understand for some folks that takes longer. I'm not trying to make it sound like that's easy,
right?
Because I understand that it's not. But I do think it's important for us to put in that effort, because at the end of it, I would rather children speak about it in the way that you just did, as opposed to, man, all I remember was screaming and yelling and arguing and fighting. And now that's become so normalized to me that I'm not necessarily seeking it out, but I'm not seeing that as concerning behaviors when I'm in my own relationships, if you get what I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, they were the adults in the situation, right? And we were the children. And so taking that responsibility. And the other thing I was going to say that I had slipped my mind was also my family, our extended family, we don't have close relationships with. And so I think that was another reason for my parents to really double down on, no, we're going to keep this unit a unit because we're all we have. We're kind of all these girls have. And so there was that extra layer of pressure to just make it work.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, and for some people that is true, you know, like you might not have an extended family that you really associate with, and then maybe it is just the immediate family. So you need to make the best of, you know, what you have.
Yeah.
But regardless, to me, the best thing I heard you say about that is the willingness to collaborate and cooperate.
Exactly.
That's the idea and the message that I try to talk about, particularly when it comes to parenting, because a lot of people, as I'm sure you know, are having children and, you know, they don't necessarily work out, which I don't think is right or wrong. Right. But you have to be willing to put your personal feelings to the side. When you have a little person there, you have to. You got to find a way. I understand it is difficult, but it's got to be done. Yeah. That's my little PSA. I will get off my soapbox now. But I want to ask you, because obviously you started to give us a little bit of a breakdown of what the relationship was like in terms of everybody in the house. How would you describe, like, let's start maybe with your bio parents, your sister, your older sister, and then the step parents. Like, can you describe kind of like what your relationship is and was like with each of them? Yeah.
So growing up, I would say I feel like I grew up from a really young age. I was very independent from a young age. My parents were always around. So to an extent. So my mom worked an hour away from where we lived, and it was a very demanding job. So she would leave before we got up in the morning for school. And, you know, with rush hour, getting home, she would usually go out to dinner with my stepdad, and then it would be like TV time. But majority of the time she was out of the house, she was working, or she was working 2 jobs or this or that. And then my father, I would go to him maybe 2 nights a week. So I just feel like I was on my own doing a lot of things, just out in the neighborhood with the kids and going to the mall, you know, hanging out at the mall and the skate park and all that kind of stuff. So from age 11, 12, I was doing my own laundry, I was making my own dinner, etc. So my parents were there, like they were involved, they were just working.
Sure.
My sister, I would say, growing up, we did not get along. We are very close now. We're best friends. That's been in adulthood. Growing up, I was the annoying little sister, right? She was shy. She was very much a girly girl, and I am not.
Okay.
I am more tomboy. My dad had 2 girls. He's very like traditional, old school, macho, authoritarian. So I was his son, like in a sense, like the garbage had to go out, the bug had to get killed. It was Marissa, right? Like Marlena, my sister, wasn't going to get her hands dirty, like would tiptoe around the house, like not want to touch, you know, dirt on the floor kind of thing. So we were just very different. And we didn't get along.
I mean, I can respect that. I mean, I have an older sister. I'm the younger one. So I can definitely, it's interesting to hear you say that though, because I know like me and my sister, number one, we didn't get along because of the age difference, because she's 4.5 years older than me.
Yeah.
So that's significant. But also, I'm a boy and she's a girl, so that obviously we just kind of that's why I was kind of laughing when you mentioned that. I was like, oh, that would be kind of interesting dynamic, I guess, if you see yourself in that way. So you said as you've gotten older, though, you guys have gotten closer now?
Yeah. Now, when I moved out for college, I'm going to Florida. I'm going to start a new life, go off on my own. And about 3 months before I moved, my sister was like, I'm coming too. And so it was this, all right, let's see how this is going to work. High school was just difficult because I think we were all going through things. Mental health issues have been present in my family my entire life. And so in high school, I was struggling with severe depression, and so was my sister, and my mom was having bouts of depression. And later in life, now I found out my dad was going through things as well. And so we were all just kind of going through things separately and not together. And that just caused a lot of rifts and a lot of space. So in high school, I did not get along with my mom at all, did not get along with my sister. My sister and my dad were really close, and I always felt like something was off with my dad, which is a weird thing to say, and it's played out in our adulthood. We're not close now. We don't have a relationship now. And I feel like I was starting to pick up on that when I was in high school. I was starting to draw that distance. My stepdad is like my dog. Like, of all my parents, like my stepdad, we've been good from jump. My stepmom, not so much. My dad, not so much. My mom, not so much. But my stepdad, I just liked him. He was chill.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason why I asked you about like the way their relationships were, so let me take a step back for a second, because traditionally in a lot of homes, when you have a step parent, like they typically tiptoe around the kids, right? Because bio parents are usually quite protective.
Yeah.
So that's why I was curious, because you said like, okay, again, we're having this big collaborative effort.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, so how were they able to interact with you? Did you feel like they were able to more or less behave like your bio parents, or did they also operate somewhat from a distance?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think my stepmom took on the hands-off role. She was more babysitter as a stepmom. She was, can pick you up from school, can entertain you until your dad gets home. The easier stuff. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I was a kid. I didn't care. I didn't know any different. She would get me Rita's Water Ice, and we would just watch SpongeBob, and everything was fine. My stepdad was involved financially, which sounds weird, but I realized that as a child. Like, I recognized that he was making that effort, which was significant to me because my stepmom was the breadwinner with my dad and my stepmom, and she never contributed. So my father was a police officer, and he had 2 girls, and he was trying to provide for us, which was much tighter, right? Sure. My mom was at first the breadwinner as well. Go women, right? We were just making all the money in my family. She was originally the breadwinner, and then when she left to pursue her passion in special education, my stepdad became the breadwinner, and he would just, if we needed $10 to go on a field trip, like, it was coming from him. Just little things like that we noticed, but he was when it came to discipline or rules, absolutely not. He went to my mom and said, you got to handle this. And I think that respect that they had is why everything worked so well.
I could imagine.
Yeah, they wanted to be a positive figure in our life, a positive adult figure without overstepping bounds. And also, my dad is a terrifying man, so I also think that my stepdad was like, yeah, I'm good. I'll sit over here and y'all can handle that.
Your dad's there, I'm gonna let him deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. But he showed up. I mean, anytime I needed anything, he drove a car with broken windows in Jersey in the snow for years to help me get my first car. Right. And I will never forget that. And I always said, when I become successful, like, I'm hooking my stepdad up with a car. Right. And my stepmom, there were no hard feelings, and, we had a good relationship, but I just don't have that same connection to her that I have to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
And also I think it's interesting when you think about, again, like, their unique approach is that, so you had both two positive male figures in your life and 2 positive female figures in your life overall, but obviously stepdad, you felt a closer connection to.
I did.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that, again, I think that to me, that comes to a point where I hope that becomes the norm for most people. I know that is not necessarily the case, because I professionally deal with that. But I am always trying to impress that point. And again, I do it, so I understand that it is challenging. But again, I think it's most important about the kids. And again, if they could speak in the way that you do, maybe not as glowingly, but if they can speak and just say, like, I appreciated the effort that my parents put into me. I know that maybe they didn't always get along, but they found a way to put those things to the side to make sure that, like, we were good. I think that we would be in a fundamentally better position, because then young people, as we would get older, we would have better examples. We would see, like, okay, I can not get along with this person, but I'm not going to demonize them. I'm not going to hate them. I'm going to still try to listen to them, because I saw that even my parents or my step parents, they didn't always agree, but they found a way to respectfully have discourse. Right. Exactly. And I feel like that's kind of getting lost with people. We're in this very friction-focused society where it's very hard for men and women to talk about a lot of different things. And then parenting obviously is one particular topic. but it has big real world implications for that next generation who have to witness and observe all of it.
It
Do you
does.
get what I mean?
Yeah, and I feel that that's why I have like a secure attachment. I had 4 parents who never left. So I feel that if these people can show up for me in this way, who, you know, my poor stepdad, right? Like 2 girl, and my mom's crazy. Like I'm crazy, my sister's crazy, my mom's crazy. Poor Rob, if he can show up into a place where it's not an easy fit, it's a difficult dynamic, it's complex in so many ways, and just show up every day and not give up. And my sister was so hard on this man. She tortured him. She really gave him the old, like, you know, and he just kept showing up. And so that's the example that I've had set to where if people really want to be there and really care for you, they're going to do it.
Yeah, I respect that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, even the reason why I asked you the question about the step parent, because I know it's very nuanced, right? Yeah. Especially, it looks different if one of the bio parents is there versus if they're not. If they're not, you can kind of, and if the other parent is empowering you, that's the other key part.
That's very true.
You can assert yourself more. But as you said, like my dad was there, so it's like, I don't need you to do that part. You can do more of the fun part.
You can pay for my field trip.
Right. I don't need you to do all the accountability stuff quite as much because my dad's going to kind of check me there. Mm-hmm. So we're good on that side. But no, I think overall, that sounds like that was a net positive experience for you.
It was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to hear that overall. So, and you already obviously touched a little bit about on the relationship dynamics with everybody. So you said that in terms of extended family, it wasn't really present for anybody.
Yeah, they were there. We just didn't have close relationships. Okay. There was a lot of drama on my mom's family side, my father's family side. For background context, mm-hmm. So I am biracial. I'm half white, half black. My mom is white. My dad is black. And my grandparents on my mom's side did not approve of the interracial relationship. And that was, my mom and dad started dating at 16, and It was a very serious situation. She ended up moving out underage, being kicked out, semantics.
Sure.
Yeah, and, you know, we only talked about this maybe 3 years ago for the first time, where I said, you know, we're all adults now, we need to address this. And, you know, they did apologize and we had a really good conversation, but it was still very much, they were coming from the lens of, it was a different time, we believed in putting the family first, you know, it's not that we were racist. But, you know, we felt that it was going to be really difficult for the family. And so she should have done the right thing and put the family first and been like, I just won't pursue this because I'm a child and I want to protect my family. Sure. And my mom's like, yeah, no, like that's not going to fly. I'm going to date who I want to date. I'm not going to adhere to these crazy rules. And so they didn't speak for years. I mean, when my sister was born, my mom wrote a letter and they, I think, wrote a letter back and still didn't talk for 6. So it was very complex. And to this day, my mom has not had the conversation with her parents. I've had the conversation with her parents. And so it's just really sore for them. It's really emotional. And so that family kind of split into sides, right? So one of her sisters was supportive and was like, you stick it to the man, you know, interracial love. And the other sister was quiet. Yeah. And so the silence said everything. And so the family kind of broke apart. And then on my father's side, his mom died when he was young. He was 12 or 13. She was 32. She had a brain aneurysm. It was a crazy incident. She was in the garage getting down a bike and the bike fell. It was horrific. My grandfather was remarried within a year or 2. So that was my grandmother, my babane. It's the only grandmother like I've known on that side. And she was there for us, but my grandfather had his own mental health issues. And there was a lot of tension on that side about him moving on so quickly, about how he chose to parent my father and my uncle. And there were just hard feelings there, a lot to get through. So they were there, but it was I never felt close to them. Yeah. I never felt that I could rely on them. And my cousins felt like nieces and nephews. There was a large age gap. My parents had us young. And so there was at the minimum a 10-year age gap. We were really babysitting. So I didn't feel like I had cousins either, you know? So it was really our immediate family.
Okay. Now, let me attempt to unpack some of what you just said. Because I really appreciate you for sharing that, because those are real things that a lot of us go through. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that. Race relations.
Yeah.
My family was somewhat similar, not exactly the same. Just in terms of there's the initial perception, I think, that a lot of folks have. To give context, my mother's side of the family, they're from El Salvador, so they're not native born. But, you know, people have these different perceptions for Black folks, right? And it comes from all over the place. I think typically media. And so because of that, I try to give a certain level of understanding that you're anticipating maybe hardship and different challenges that if as a parent you naturally would want your child to avoid.
Protection.
Like I can say that as a father. I would naturally think, you know, I don't know if that's in your best interest. However, with all that being said, I do think that in order for that to become more normalized where people accept that, yes, there may be some inherent difficulties, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth the opportunity to actually explore those type of relationships and see what beauty may come of it.
Yeah.
I think that can, and I believe is changing for the better, and I am hopeful for that. But I do know, because I have had those conversations too, and unfortunately for a lot of folks, especially I would say within the last 50 years, it was a different time. I mean, we know just in this country, we know it used to be illegal, right? Of
course.
So it's not like it wasn't status quo that you needed to kind of stay in your own ethnic group, right?
Right.
But I do agree that it's unfortunate that sometimes families feel that perception is so much worse than actually just being there and supporting those that you really care for, regardless of that particular choice that they make. And I get it, but it's just one of those things that I'm very sensitive to, and I really try very, very hard to understand both sides.
Yeah. And I think just our culture is more individualistic. And so even when I engaged in the conversation with them, they were honestly like shocked that I didn't have the same feelings about it. They said, if your parents came to you and were like, this is, for your safety and put it, wouldn't you listen to your parents? And I was like, no, like I would, do what I think is right. And if I think that, it's the right thing to make a stand and say, no, I'm going to be in, then I would do that. But there was just a disconnect. And it's not to say, right, like they don't have valid points.
Right.
But I also think another game changer is I think as a generation, we're more so seeing as you have children and it is your job to support them as they move through the world. It's not your job to mold them, right? They are individuals and they're going to have to navigate the world on their own. And I think older generations more so saw it as, if something goes wrong, it's my fault. If something goes right, it's because I did it right. And this child is a reflection of me and they are me. Right. And I think we're more so realizing now that that's not the case, right? It is to an extent, but also you can be the best parent in the world, right? And your kid's just going to be your kid. They're a human being at the end of the day.
I agree. And and especially that last part, I think that there was this sense, and I've even struggled with this myself, where, and I'll use my son as an example, like I see myself in him, right? And I am from the old school of, you represent me when you go out into the world, right? Yeah. But I also think that once you hit 18, and I told him this, and I have told him this, that, you start making your own decisions, right? You start to get that sense of autonomy that you've never had, right? It comes with responsibility too, but you get to now make choices that are going to impact your life however you wish them to be. And I have to be okay with and be at peace with, I did the best that I could do up until that point. Yeah. Which I think is maybe different, because maybe in previous generations it's like, hey, I'm responsible for you as long as I'm breathing type deal. Instead of, it doesn't mean, of course, we should turn our back on our kids when they turn 18, but I'm going to be here up until this point, and then after that, our relationship has to sort of change. Yeah. It's going to go less me trying to give you very pronounced guidance to me being like that sound box or soundboard where you can reflect things off of me. Maybe I can offer you some wisdom and some lived experience, and you can do with it what you will. I think that is sort of the direction that we're moving in. Yeah. And I do think that is healthy and it is okay. But I think for the previous generation, maybe it was harder for them because that's just sort of what they grew up with. Yeah.
But also that the world it's hard. Life is hard, right? And so
very hard.
And the question of, protecting your kids from the world, if you're not showing them from a young age, life is hard, the world is difficult, but I'm here, right? Like, this is always your safe space. You have a landing pad that I can't control what goes out there in the world, but I can support you in making the best decisions and know that even if you mess up, I'm going to be here.
Right.
And that takes a level of letting go, which is so incredibly hard because it feels like a piece of you is just living and existing outside of your body. And you just have to trust that the most important thing is that they know however bad it gets out there, they can come back to you and be safe.
Yeah. That's essentially where I'm at. I feel like I had a really good balance of I brought up the extended family part because like I'm very close with both sides of my extended family. Both my family is very, very large.
I'm jealous.
And so yeah, it helps. It helps. When Dad didn't pull it together, like, hey, I'm going to my aunt, I'm going to my uncle. So that really helped. But I like the idea of what you presented. Like you present everything and try to input everything that you can into that child, and obviously you hope and wish the best for them. But just making sure that they know that door is always open and that they can come to you for whatever it is, that they got going on.
Right.
I think is immensely important because one thing I will say, and the reason why I lean into that more is because I was raised in that old school way when it was like, when you're 18, you got to go.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was like, and it was more like, I'm kind of there for you, but you really need to know how to do this by yourself.
Yeah.
And while I respect aspects of it, I think it makes life a little bit too hard. Because as you said, I'm going to echo what Marissa said, life is incredibly difficult. And it can be even worse when you feel like you're isolated and alone. Like, who do I go to when I have these questions about these complex things that I haven't really dealt with before?
Right.
And so I think when you have that relationship and that stability with that parent, caregiver, whoever it was that raised you, right? And you can go to them and they'll give you the real, and they're going to be honest with you because they do care about you, and you may not always get along in terms of having the same viewpoints, but they're going to always try to have the best in mind for you.
Right.
To me, that is immensely and paramount to the formation of that relationship, so that when they become adults, you know that they're more than likely they'll come back to you to share with you, and not just think like, well, you told me I had to leave, so why would I come back to you and talk to you when I'm having hardship? Because we didn't really cultivate that type of relationship, if you get what I'm saying. Yeah,
and it's almost ironic that the idea is, right, to prepare you for the world, but it's almost my grandparents had the opposite effect, to where they were the ones causing pain and they were the ones rejecting and being difficult, not the world, right? And had they provided that safe space and said, listen, this would not be the path that we would take, or whatever they wanted to say, but at the end of the day, we are here, you're gonna do what you need to do, and we love and support you, that would have been way different, right, than where we're at now, where they didn't speak for a decade and she felt that she had no family, right? What would hurt her more? The world looking at her because she was in an interracial relationship, or her parents rejecting her? The irony. For a decade.
That's a long time.
Right?
To not have that support. Yeah, I can't.
Honestly, over a decade.
I can't. I can imagine, but it's just very interesting how sometimes like their values or way that they think that things should be override their willingness to just provide that level of comfort and support. Again, even when we disagree, I can still say like, I don't support this course of action that you want to go down.
Right.
But I'm still going to be here for you. But I also want you to know that whatever happens, like, you need to take responsibility for that because you chose it, right? But I'll still have your back. Like that's how I feel like I'm going to say that when the time comes.
And not even just in parent-child relationships, in any relationship in life, right? Like, I think even in friendships, we get so invested and we take things so personally, right? Like, if our friend goes back to that like toxic relationship and are like, I can't, and you like ruin friendships, and it's would you rather that person have a difficult experience and come back to you and want to have that support in that relationship, or them to go out and they're going to do it anyway,
right,
and then have no one and then be broken, right? That's not friendship. That's not love.
Yeah. No, I see, I would take that a couple of different ways because I agree with you. I think that, so there's a very nuanced way in how we see relationships of any kind, right? Yeah. So when I talk about friendships, I always think too, which we'll talk about in a little while, expectations.
Right.
So for me, I'll just give my perspective. You can share share that and take that how you will. So I think of it both from the way I would build friendships with people and also how I see clients. So I'm by definition and right off the bat going to be very open to however people not only present, the choices that they make, all of those things above. Yeah. I would give them the space to do so, right? I'm not going to be like, oh, I think that's dumb, so you shouldn't do it, right? I'm gonna say, no, that's fair. This is what you want to do. Let's think this through and see what comes of it. At the same time, I'm very big on accountability. So in this example, I would say, let's say I have a friend who is coming to me not once, not two, not three, not four, 5 times, and they're talking about the same issue.
Happens a lot.
Right? For me, my thought process is, I'm not going to abandon that person. But what I am going to do is I'm going to institute and enforce my own boundaries. And my personal boundaries would be, listen, I cannot continue to engage in this conversation with you because we've had this conversation so many times, and it appears, you can let me know if I'm wrong, it appears that you're unwilling to listen and try to implement anything that we're discussing. And if they say, hey, that's fair, you're right, I don't really care what you think, I'm going to do what I want to do. Then I would say, you know what, then respectfully, I don't want to have that discussion anymore because it's impacting my ability to want to be here for you.
Absolutely.
Just being very conscious and aware of what I know that I need. So that way I don't feel like, you know what, well, F them. I don't want to be in this friendship anymore. You go do you, and whatever happens, you know, you deserve it. I don't want us to kind of go to that extreme. Right. But I do think that that's when boundaries are important and understanding like, hey, there's limits. Some of us don't want to keep having the same conversation. As empathetic and as open as I am, I understand that I can't do it that many times. But I'm curious, what do you think about that?
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think when you're setting boundaries, you're doing it because you care about the relationship. Setting boundaries is difficult. Enforcing your boundaries is even more difficult. And so if you're going through that process to say what you need and to set that boundary with that person, I think that's because you care about the relationship. That's very different than abandonment, right? You said that at the forefront. You said, I am not going to abandon them, but I'm going to share my perspective and what I need from the relationship, etc., right? I completely agree with that. That's the difference, right, between what happened with my mom and her parents, right? They went like this. And I have seen friendships in the past where they're like, if they're not going to listen, right, I'm not going to be there. There's a middle ground, right, where we can come together, and I think that's it. Okay.
No, I would agree with you. I think we don't want to be in these extremes of I must accept everything.
Right.
Or if you don't accept everything that I say, I'm rejecting you and everything that we've built, regardless of how much time we've put in, and then like, you know, we're done.
Absolutely.
To me, like most things, life is on a spectrum, just like relationships, just like communication. And we just need to learn to be very clear about what it is that we need and what we want. And, you know, especially just the idea, and I usually use the example of kids because most people can understand. I think of what a lot of parents, especially back in the day, they had this concept sort of misconstrued that they controlled their children.
Right.
Right. And I understand why that comes to be. My father did this too. Because it seems like it, because when you say to do something, they tend to follow. Right. And so I say it's so close that it misrepresents itself as control, but it's actually, in my opinion, it's influence. When they're really young. Like I was an extremely obedient child because my father was extremely intimidating. So I did everything he told me to do. I never said anything. I just did it. Yes, sir. And that was it. And so I recognized as I got older that of course at some point, like I was naturally very curious and I would want to ask more questions, and he wasn't really about that. He's like, hey, like there's no follow up here. When I say it, you just execute. There's no talking back here. And I recognize that with my own son. Not that I went down that path, but I recognize that he's very curious as well. And it's important to kind of allow for that latitude, right? So you can have more open discussions. They can learn to critically think about things and not just follow directions and be that way. But I bring that up because that old school of parenting to me felt like I'm losing control as they get to adolescence and they're listening to their friends, and if they're a man, they're listening to girls, if they're girls, maybe they're listening to boys, instead of like, what am I telling you to do? Because we're thinking about what's best for you. So they think like we're in this tug of war for control, and I'm like, no, you're losing influence, which is natural, because once they get to the point of 18, not that they shouldn't need anything from you, but they should have, we would want them ideally to have some sense of self some sense of autonomy. So by the time they're ready to go out there and go live and do the different things that they're going to do, they feel confident in themselves, right? In their ability to perform, to be responsible, to be accountable, whatever those things are. But I think a lot of parents get that confused. I think partners get that confused. I think friendships get that confused. If I said it to you, you're my friend, right? If I said that, why are you not doing it? Then the resistance comes, because it's like, well, I set an expectation. I didn't mention it, but I actually set an expectation. Marissa came to me with this scenario. I told her my feedback. We didn't discuss it, but my expectation was she was going to listen to it and she was going to implement it. So then she comes back to me and what? She's crying about the same thing. And I'm like, why are we talking about this again? Didn't we already do this whole song and dance? So now I'm frustrated with you, and maybe I'm evaluating things and I'm saying, do I really want to be her friend? Because it seems like she doesn't like to listen well. Instead of saying, you know what? This is what I learned as a therapist. People are going to be who they are. Sometimes they change when they're ready. Some people don't change, but I always believe that they can. The capacity is there, but they'll change when they want to. But if you don't go into situations expecting people to do what you want, and you just say, you know what, I'm going to give you my open feedback and do with it what you will, I think we won't abandon people maybe as much. I think that we'll continue to support people more, and then that would just help us create more healthier boundaries with people so that we can maintain those types of relationships. I know that was a very long-winded way to say that, but what do you think about just that scenario I put that together?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's centering yourself in someone else's experience, right? And I really, the example you gave with parenting really resonated with me, because the reason why I didn't get along with my father growing up was because he was the same, right? He was very, oh my goodness, what he said goes, because I'm the dad, etc.
Oh, yeah.
And I hated that. I was so defiant. The amount of times I got in trouble for talking back, that was Marissa talks back. That was always the thing. Didn't respect authority because I would question authority. I needed answers, right? And we said this in the very beginning, that kids are like sponges, right? If you just explain things to them, they're like, okay, sounds good, right? And so I was just wanting answers and I wasn't getting them. And I think that really debilitates people.
Yes.
And that's what causes people to not be able to think for themselves and to adhere to peer pressure, right?
Yeah.
If they're just taught, you just listen to what people say, that is not a healthy message.
That's a great way to have followers.
Right. To send your kid out into the world and to not be inquisitive, to not challenge things, and to just go with things. I think that can be really harmful. And there is a balance, right? There's a line. And again, I think a lot of our parents, different generations, but also came from a different world with military service, right? And just coming from, my father's a police officer, has been his whole life. So it was not even a question, but I think that's really what drove the wedge between us. Was I was trying to become an independent adult, free thinker, critical thinker, and he did not. He thought it was disrespectful.
Right. And that's exactly, I appreciate you sharing that. That's exactly why I gave my example, because I think my father didn't really learn and appreciate that for a very, very long time. And I get it. To put myself, I like to try to put ourselves in other people's shoes. When I tried to think about his experience, I was like, okay, he came from a family where there wasn't a lot of individual attention because there was multiple children. Not that that's a bad thing, but you just kind of the law of numbers. There's two parents and there's multiple children, so do the math. And so I can imagine that might have played a role in kind of how he saw himself, and then the interactions that you do have, if that's kind of how they went. Even things that we don't like, which I do want to make this point real quick. Even thoughts and behaviors that we despised when we were growing up, if we don't learn to challenge those things, we're largely going to replicate them when we have ourselves in that position, whether it's as a parent or maybe as a romantic partner. And so I believe that for a lot of us, they were just reproducing what they were taught, even if there was things that they didn't agree with, which I found out my father didn't like. And yet he put me and my sister through that. And so I learned after I tried to put myself in that scenario, okay, so then I need to be different, right? Because I don't want my son looking at me the way that I looked at him, because I know how I felt. And as you said, it was not positive. And it hindered a real opportunity to create a real relationship. I was actually having this conversation with one of my clients and his father a couple of days ago. I just want to make this point because you just had me thinking about it. When it comes to like, as the young man or young woman gets to that point of 18 and they're starting to make those decisions for themselves, right? We were talking about that. And I said earlier, like, the relationship has to evolve. Yeah. The relationship between parent and child. The parent's still a parent, the child's still a child. They're still their child, but they become their own person, right? But there's so much in life that you don't know. I literally told my client that you're like a baby. Not in a disrespectful way. As an adult, you're a baby because you just turned 18. So you just started at zero again. You don't know anything about how things are supposed to be. Not because you're dumb. It's just ignorance through the lack of experience. It would behoove us then to, if we have good enough relationships with our parents, to talk to them about things that we don't know, right? So we can gain insight from their experience. Not because it's the same, but there are a lot of shared experiences that we do have. It's not always that different. Even across, race and gender lines. But I brought that up because I told the father and the son together, I said, man, I wish for the son to feel comfortable and confident enough to go to his father when he does get these big picture questions that he's not sure about. Not because he can't speak to his mother, to be clear, but because he's a man and his father's a man. So naturally, we're going to ascribe to try to be somewhat like them. And the father backed that up 100%. And I was like, man, I really want that for you. That when you're not sure where to go, that you would talk to him about these things. Same thing for a daughter with her mother. Not saying that she couldn't talk to her dad, but women have a very unique lived experience. Men have a unique lived experience. And they were all in agreement. And I was like saying that kind of vicariously for myself, because I know in the future, I wanted to be able to say that to my son and for him to be like, yeah, I would come to you. Because I'm working really, really hard to build that kind of relationship now.
Create that safe space.
Right, where you feel like we didn't just start doing this, we've been doing this for years. Exactly. So it doesn't feel foreign, it doesn't feel uncomfortable, it doesn't feel awkward. And it's not a far-fetched idea to say like, hey, yeah, sit down, like let's talk about dating, let's talk about career, let's talk about where do you see your life going. Those really hard concepts that as individuals, it's usually pretty difficult for us to start to pin down, if you get what I mean.
Of course, completely agree.
So it's just one of those things that I try to impress upon all of us. And I know that it's very difficult to be consistent about, because depending on how we grew up, again, some of us came from like very put your head down and just do what you're told. And I appreciate that, because that was me. But I also know better now. So I want us to do better. Yeah.
You're either going to repeat the cycle or break it.
Yes. I'm for breaking those cycles.
Let's break it.
If you didn't get the impression now for all this talking. Okay. So actually, on the same line of thought and kind of like holding with your grandparents, okay, and your family, because I think you can offer a unique perspective. I'm going to frame this question a little differently than I normally do. Yeah. So for those of us that have different parents from different ethnic backgrounds, we have a different lived experience, right? I don't know what it's like for you. I'm going to ask you in a moment. For a lot of us, I'll use myself. My father didn't have that lived experience, right? So his whole family is black. My mom's family, their whole family is Latino. So like they only know each other. Right. But when you're the product of that, you have a different lens. Is that fair for me to say?
Absolutely.
So like, and if we don't have that type of relationship with our parents, they don't necessarily know how to tell us how to navigate that in terms of things like identity, cultural norms, traditions, values. Hopefully you see where I'm going here. What was it like for you in terms of how you see yourself within the context of your own family? Because you've obviously given us a little bit about with your grandparents and then your parents. So like, did you guys have those kind of conversations? And if so, like, how did it go?
Yes. Yes, we did. And I laugh because, we're still having the conversations. Okay. My mom she's me, just older. I love her so much and we are very close. But they have been very difficult conversations because she is white. And clearly the parents that she grew up with, the family that she grew up with, they were not like overly accepting by any means, right? And so it was a really difficult identity crisis, I'd say, just when everyone's having their identity crisis, middle school going into high school.
Correct.
I remember it was a really big deal because I would just identify as black. And my mom, that really, really upset her. And she expressed that, I feel like when you say that, you're not acknowledging me or you're ashamed of me. And I would say, I feel like if I say that I'm half white, it comes off like, I don't want it to come off like, oh, I'm half white, you know? It just felt yucky. I don't even know a better word to describe. I didn't want to go through school being like, oh, I'm half white to try to fit in or to gain some type of leg, because I didn't see it like that. I thought being black was cool. Like, it was so weird to be in that space of like, I genuinely saw my black family as like cool. And then my white family is like corny. Like, I don't know how to so, and you grow up with like media and rap and all that kind of, and I was so much more into that lifestyle, right? But I did have to like switch gears, right? I was a cheerleader, and there were times where I had to pull my white card out of my pocket, right? And use that as a leg up. Like, no, I am half white, you know, which feels gross. Like, but I was trying to navigate this as a young kid in the world, right? It was second grade, where someone asked me why my mom was a different color, and I had no idea what they were talking about. I did not know that my mom is blonde hair, blue eyes, white. I did not understand what they meant. Right. I didn't even know that I was black. Right. Like, until
we don't have any context for these things.
Right. And so I just remember being like, what? And my mom couldn't do my hair, and my teacher in fourth grade called my mom in for a conference and gave her hair product and was like, you need to learn how figure this out. Yeah, you can't send her into the world. So, I mean, I was navigating that. Yeah. They all got together just fine. I mean, my mom into my dad's family. They were very accepting of her. They were very close. My babane loved my mom. That was even, they were black, but it was a largely Turkish family that was married in. So my babane, that means baba anne, father's mother in Turkish. So I was raised with that family, black family, Turkish family, and white family. And it was always trying to balance where I felt like I was most accepted. I feel like, do you know Earl Sweatshirt? I feel like I always think of too black for the white kids and too white for the black. The Earl Sweatshirt line, you know? And I was always trying to toe that line. And it was really difficult. And we're still to this day having conversations where my mom's buying books and she's like asking questions and just trying to not be that person who like has black kids and isn't understanding or, you know, involved in black culture.
Heard. First of all, I appreciate everything you just laid out there. And I want to make sure this is clear for anybody who's watching this too, is to understand these are all very unique perspectives that we all have. So please don't judge. I don't judge anybody here. I think you're allowed to speak freely about what your lived experience is, right? I just say that because, you know, we do live in a time where people like to misrepresent what people say. Right. But I really agree with a lot of what you said. And I think the reason why I like to talk about it is because it's so hard. Yeah. Because I remember even me growing up, like my father didn't have any conversation about it. Like the way I grew up, the conversation was more like, you are who your father is. And so my father's black, so I identified as black. And that's just, that was the end of the story. For the most part, in terms of like how I saw myself in the world. But even like you described, I remember being confused at times because my mom, she passed away when I was really young, but she was very fair skinned. My sister and I don't really look the same. She's very fair skinned. Yeah. And I remember being confused at times because people might look and be like, oh, you, like people thought my sister was my mom sometimes, just because like it kind of matched more. My father's very dark skinned. So I remember having those conversations sometimes and like just genuinely being confused like you were describing. And then, but in terms of family, like nobody made me feel weird. Right. Everybody was very embracing in that regard, which was great. And again, my family's huge, so I didn't have any problems there. But just in terms of how you see yourself, and then more importantly, I have thought about how do people perceive you. Right. So, and I'm going to try my best to not go off on too much on a tangent, but things like safety. So we know for a lot of men, a lot of black men in particular, they're being perceived as inherently threatening. So there's things that my father had me do, but he never really explained to me. So for example, like I have very long hair now. He never let me have long hair. Right. My hair was always very, very short. I was very clean cut, kind of like a preppy kid, because I did go to school with a fair amount of white kids. And so we never had those discussions. But as I started to reflect back on it as I got older, I was like, I think he was trying to protect me by having me present in a way that's like, hey, this little brown kid is safe. He's not a bad kid. He's not a thug. He's not running the streets type deal. Because again, my dad, he cracked the whip hard. So I appreciate those aspects, but again, I wish we talked about it. Right. To your point about what we're talking about, because when you do have family that come from different cultural backgrounds, it is inherently confusing. Not because anybody's trying to make it confusing, it just is. You're trying to blend two aspects that don't 100% align, which I think is okay. Right. In my case, there was also a language barrier, so I had to navigate that too. But I just think it's important for us now that there's more children, my son included, who are the products of these types of relationships, that we need to be a little bit more open and really try to sit in whatever discomfort may come up and how people identify. Mm-hmm. So for example, when you said like, oh yeah, I kind of identify with my black side, I said my white side was corny. I would want, not that that's not your lived experience, like you're allowed to say that, right? It's your family. But I would hope that in the future, somebody can say, I have like 5 different communities that I'm a part of, right? Mm-hmm. And I might not equally identify with all of them. And I think that that's totally fine, right? You might lean more towards one than the other. Mm-hmm. But I holistically appreciate all aspects of me. Right. That's all I'm ever trying to get us to. Mm-hmm. Like my son's all mixed up, and him and I will have these conversations at a later time. But I want him to appreciate all of those aspects of the different cultures that are within him, learn a little bit about them, because I think it's important. But then you choose how you want to identify. You can choose how you want to present. Mm-hmm. I also want you to understand that other people may not see you in the way that you see yourself. So you need to be educated on what those things are. Because sometimes, people may not, let's be real. I talked about this on our show yesterday. We all judge.
Of course.
And I'm not saying it because it is the way that we inherently want to be, but there are good reasons why we judge too. It's not all
Protection.
That it's bad.
Yeah.
Correct. But I do want us to be willing to go a little deeper than that surface, right? So you might present right now, and then I might have just been like, oh yeah, it's just a black woman. And you might say, no. Half my family is white. Don't get it twisted.
Biracial.
Right?
Yeah.
And I need to respect and I need to honor that. And try my best to not presume those things right off the bat just by looking at you. And I, as difficult as it is, and I fully appreciate this is very difficult to do, okay? But I do think we need to put in a little bit more of an effort to respect that. Because we do have people coming from all walks of life now who look all different types of ways.
It's true.
That fit in communities that we come from. And I think we need to be a little more accepting of that. But I would like to know what you think.
Yeah. I mean, it really wasn't much of a conversation growing up. These were just like the thoughts in my head and the experience. I mean, my sister and I didn't even discuss these things. I knew that there was a problem with my family, but I didn't know. And when I say problem, I mean the separation from my grandparents. But I wasn't told about why that was until I was old enough to understand the information. Better. Right. Interestingly enough, growing up, the separation in my family and the cultural differences had to do with religion. So my Turkish family that was married in they were Muslim, and my mother was Catholic and my father was Baptist. And so that was really more so influential on how I grew up than even my race was. And that was really a difficult thing to navigate because of how serious it was in my family, that I think that has arguably shaped me, if not equally more than growing up trying to navigate where I fell because I was biracial.
Sure. And I've heard those stories too, for people who have family who come from different faiths and then trying to figure out, because that inherently can be, I think that sometimes can be harder than really from a racial standpoint to try to come together, because you're like, somebody's converting. And then what happens if neither wants to? Like, how do you...
And that's what happened. That's what happened in my family. And it was just really difficult and confusing when my babane passed, the ceremony was done in the way that was respectful to her religion. And so she was, in a casket in the middle of the living room, and they bind the hands and they put a knife. It's a whole ceremony. And I just remember my dad took us into another separate room, and my sister was crying. I'm not much of a public crier. I'm a private crier. I love to cry, but not in public. Okay. And so she was crying, and he was comforting her, and my sister was just like, I'm so sorry, because that was his second mother that he'd lost, and she was saying, Dad, how are you? Is everything okay? And he said, well, now she's in hell. And to hear your father say that about his mother, whom it was one of the most painful, shocking experiences of my life, that this can be your mother, but because of religion, it was such a divide in our family. Yeah. And it really it put something in me that, you know, the question about how culture, you know, shapes your life experiences. I mean, that moment right there.
Yes, ma'am.
The outlook that I have on this world because of that. I mean, I could write a book on it. Honestly.
No, I get that. I mean, that's why I try to engage in these types of discussions and really start to talk about it, because I think people are naturally living a lot of this, right? They're going through it, but they just don't necessarily allow that space to really be open about it. And sometimes families get fractured, you know, permanently.
Yeah.
Or people pass away and you can't, you know, reconcile in the traditional sense.
And just the fighting that went on in that room. It was supposed to be a moment of mourning and coming together as a family, and two sides of the family on different sides of the casket arguing over which prayers to say and not to be disrespectful in the it was crazy. I have no other way to say it, but yeah.
No, man, I mean, I can imagine in those type of scenarios, like how people get very hardwired and they kind of revert back to, you know, what they know or what they hold to be true, instead of, you know, just honoring that person, their life, their legacy,
and what they would have wanted.
Right. That's what I'm thinking about. Like, anytime you lose somebody, when you think about loss and you're trying to help somebody move forward, I'm always trying to impress upon somebody else who's going through it, because I've gone through it several times in my life. Think about what they would want for themselves, and also think about what they would want for you, you know, for your future, right? Yeah. And I think for most people, obviously, I don't know everybody, but I'd like to believe, just because I've been through it enough times, I like to think of myself somewhat as an expert in this. People want the best for you, no matter how divided you may have been, no matter how close you may have not been, you know, in later years. I think that genuinely, if they cared about you, they would want the best for you. And then you know, you can interpret that as you will. But I think that helps people to come to some level of peace, where they can kind of resolve that inner conflict and not be holding on to things like in a grudge type of way. But religion is one of those things I know that for some people, you know, they will literally take it to the grave.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on there. All right, so now we're gonna make a little bit of a pivot, because we've talked at length about family, which again I really appreciate. So let's talk a little bit more personally about Marissa. So help us understand a little bit about what your dating life has been like so far.
Yeah, so I've had really positive experiences. I would say relationships and partnerships, I've had very positive experiences. Not so much the dating.
Okay.
I've had some horror stories, some horrific experiences.
I'm sure, as most of us have.
Oh my goodness. But I will say, you know, I grew up very young. My first boyfriend, I'd say, was 13. I've been dating consistently since. I'd say, and I think this is my controversial opinion on, you know, people always say first dates, things not to talk about. I am the exact opposite. That's all I want to talk about, because I mean, where I sit, I'm dating to look for a partnership, for a relationship. And to me, if on your first date, I feel like you're on your best behavior. I feel like you meet someone, right, and you want to be respectful and you want to be kind and you want to put your best foot forward. And if my goal is to seek a partner, that feels like a safe space to pick your brain and see if we are aligned on the things that matter most to me. Agreed. So they say, you know, don't talk about religion, politics, That's all I want to talk about. I want to make sure we're not wasting anyone's, you know, because these are the things that I truly value. And if we're not aligned on these things, a relationship, we're not compatible, right? We can be friends, right? I have friends with a million differing views, right? But partnership wise, so I think the reason I've had such good relationships is because that first date, it lasted for hours talking about things that you are not supposed to talk about, right? And just ensuring that we were aligned there, and then the rest comes easy after that. The rest, you know? No,
I would agree. I think that, and I don't know who had that conventional wisdom, but I do think that it is important to talk about those harder concepts. If, I'm going to put a big if here, if you're dating intentionally.
Right.
That's the word that I always like to use, because for a lot of us, I think that, especially when we're younger, we're just sort of falling into things. We're not necessarily moving in a way where we want to seriously evaluate if this type of person can grow into this type of relationship with this type of longevity. I think we're more like, I like the way you look. and we kind of keep it very superficial. And because of that, we're like, well, if that part's good, maybe the other things would just sort of come into play, you know, as more time progresses. And as I gotten older, I think that that's not necessarily gonna, I'll just put it like this, I think it's not gonna serve us well for the long term, because of one of the key things that you said. You talked about time. I think about us not only not wasting as much time as possible, but also trying to filter out people who don't share values, as you were touching on, that you really know that are important to you. Right. Things that you align yourself with, things that if they're not held in common, it won't work. So I agree with you in that regard. I think we need to lay those things out in the beginning, so that way, if we, you know, we imagining the other alternative, if we dated for like 5 weeks and then we finally had the discussion, you're like, well, these are these things that I really need. And you're like, well, I can't give you those things. Yeah. Then what have we been doing for 5 weeks?
Exactly.
You know?
But I think that comes with the experience, right? That's why I feel like I'm 55 years old trying to date, because I feel like I did all that, right? And also, you know, we talk about our past experiences, our family lives that shape us into who we are. I've had relationships that I feel like were so successful and I can speak so highly of them, and they ended, right? Like, I am single and I wouldn't trade them for the world. And my whole family is always like, Marissa dates the best guys. I've had such good experiences that I know it's possible. And so that's why when I see those red flags, or, you know, I'm having these conversations and little things are starting to like not sit right, bye. Like, right. I'm not so interested in just like, let's just see how it goes, because I've done that. I've dated for years, you know, and I move with a different intentionality now.
Agreed. And that's essentially what I'm trying to get us to when I'm even engaging this particular topic. It's just thinking like, how serious are you going about the process of dating and courtship, if you really want, not only if you want to be taken seriously, but if you want that person to take you seriously, and making sure like, are you presenting the most well-composed version of yourself, meaning you know what you're looking for, you've done that inner work so you can articulate it to somebody, and then you of course want them to do that in return, so that way you have a very clear picture. This is what Marissa wants, this is what I want. Is it compatible, yes or no? If it is, great, let's continue. If not, maybe we need to move separately.
And your honest self, right? Because I also think first dates, we meet someone, we want to be the best, and we want to present ourselves in this amazing way, and we might stretch something and say something that's not exactly right.
I'm a CEO.
Yeah, well, that's a stretch, but or maybe like, oh yeah, I'm moving out this month. Yeah. Right? And you're not moving out this month, right? And those little things, like if you don't put your honest self forward and those things come out, now it looks like a lie. And this has happened, right? And I don't think the intention is like, I'm gonna lie, you know? I think we really feel like, I want them to like me, right? We want to be likable. And so we say the things that we think are going to get them to like us, but then it all comes out in the wash, right?
Of course. No, and I agree with you. I think that best foot forward is always going to be like the initial kind of way we present, right? But I do think the quicker we can get to where I'm being my most authentic self when I'm talking, I do think that that's mostly the most important part, because then at least that person can get a more holistic evaluation of what you're about. And then they can decide, you know, do I want to continue or not? And then of course, vice versa. What you're doing, at least the way I think of it, what you're putting out there is what you want to receive, right? So if I'm trying to put this most complete picture of myself, is because I want the most complete picture of you, so we can make a fair determination, right? All right, cool. She gave me the snap, so we're good. Okay. So this one, slight pivot, but this was more, we've kind of talked about this before. This is more for the era that we live in, right? So we know that we live in a time where social media is very present, ever present, I should say. I am not against it. I think that it can be a great tool for a lot of different things. Yeah. However, I also think that based on what I've observed from a lot of people and what they talk about, that we know that sometimes there's comparison complexes that people develop. We also know that sometimes there's a challenge with understanding and appreciating validation that we're getting from people online versus the people that we actually know and that we have allowed to get to know us, right? So with that being said, for you, just based on your experience, not that you need to speak for everybody, what is more important to you? Is it validation from others that don't really have that opportunity to get to know you in that online space? Or is it from the people who you have kind of bare your soul to and allow them to really see the real you?
Yeah, it's definitely my close relationships. I've never been that big of a social media person. I use Instagram, I enjoy it, but I mean, I'm private. I have, less than 1,000 followers. I post stories when I'm crying watching reality television. It's more of just to connect with my actual friends. I really don't have people on there that are outside of my circle or outside of my community. So, I really do seek that validation from people who I care about, and I would respect what their opinion of me would be, right? I think a big problem is the amount of feedback that you can get from people. I don't think we're supposed to have access to.
Wait. Can you say that one more time, please?
Yeah, I don't think the amount of feedback that we receive is healthy. And a lot of times you're receiving feedback from people that you if you knew them in real life, you might not even care what their opinion was, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Please continue, Marissa.
And so the feedback that matters to me is the people that I respect and I care for. And I think we're probably supposed to have just less access. We're probably a little overwhelmed.
I could do nothing but agree with you. I think that's why I talked about the comparison aspect, particularly when you talk about young people. Not to say that older people don't do this, but particularly like prepubescent, adolescent teens.
Yeah.
Like I think about that as a dad. Like that's the reason why my son has no access to those things, because it's hard enough.
It's hard enough.
It's hard enough trying to figure out who you are, how you feel like you fit, growing into your body.
Let me know when you get
changes.
there.
Right. Like all these things, you're just like
still trying
one
to
thing
figure
after
it out.
another. The last thing I think that I would need, and thankfully I didn't grow up with it, is going on my phone. I'm looking, I'm scrolling. I'm like, man, this person has this life. This person is doing this. Man, everything seems fantastic. Why the hell is that not my life? Why does my life suck? Why does it seem so insignificant compared to others? And that's the part that I don't like.
Yeah.
That's the part that I push back against and say, we got to remember, another PSA. Everything that we share, and a lot of what we share, majority of the time, what I have seen, you correct me if you feel differently, is it's very tailored, it's very manicured, it's very curated. So it's giving you a certain image of what people want you to see. You're not seeing that stuff that happens behind the scenes. You're not seeing those challenging moments that they go through. You're not seeing them when they're overcoming challenges and adversity, because people don't tend to share that stuff. They share what I always call the highlight reel.
Yeah.
Everything that looks great. Everything's rosy. They never had to go through anything hard. But I know, as a man, as an adult, as a therapist, that is not true. But we don't talk about these things. So how would you know, right, if we don't talk about it? What do you think about that?
It's actually so interesting because, I have cousins in high school and I've talked about this with my friends a lot. Everyone knows that. We all know that it's not real, that it's curated, that it's tailored, and that doesn't matter. Its impact on you is the same. You can be completely aware that all these pictures that these influencers are posting are edited and are filtered, etc., and you still feel bad about yourself. It's something outside of intellectualizing. It's a deeper feeling, and I am so empathetic to the younger generation because it's designed to be that way. It's designed to be addictive. It's designed. The creator of Facebook, right, said he doesn't let his children use Facebook. The creator of TikTok said he doesn't let his children use TikTok. That's saying something, right? Yeah. And so I think we know it, and it's still just as harmful. And I'm empathetic to people growing up in this generation where that is the norm, and it's addictive, and it feels inescapable.
Yeah, and even, which I don't have, thankfully for me, I don't have an issue with, I would say, being the bad guy in that regard and putting down that boundary.
I think it's important.
Yes, because I think it's more like I will take whatever smoke my son wants to give me and be like,
100%.
Dad, I can't use it. No, you cannot.
Yes.
We'll talk about when we think it's appropriate, but it ain't happening no time soon. Because I'm thinking more about the longevity and how that might impact you and how you see yourself. Again, because I started thinking about this because I would get young clients, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, male and female, and they would talk about that stuff. And, me not having grown up with it in that way, it's a foreign concept because I have formulated my sense of identity. So not to say I'm not sensitive to them, right? But I didn't have to do it in that public way. Like I was in the MySpace generation, for those that didn't, like that was popping in high school before Facebook was. That was my generation. So it was different back then versus now. And then of course, we have the phone, so we have access constantly, things being fed to you, notifications, just all that stuff. So I'm very sensitive to how that impacts young people. And at the same time, I always like to talk about the sort of duality of things. Like everything is not good or bad.
Right. Everything's gray.
So there's a lot of the things there that can be useful. I've heard a lot about great community building that can happen,
yes.
and connection that can happen if you're being intentional about it. Again, being intentional. So I'm certainly not anti it, but these are like some of those more in-depth discussions that I feel like we should talk about a little more openly, so that, for example, in my opinion, I don't have a daughter, I hope to one day, that young women are not feeling like they need to subscribe to these like perfect images, like kind of like what you were describing a moment ago of, I know these things are filtered, so like I'm not supposed to look exactly like them. And then even for the young men, I think for some of them that could be there, or just feeling like they don't measure up, you know, feeling like they're less than, feeling like I don't have as much of those images to share too, so like I guess that I'm not that valuable. Because I think a lot about self-worth, that a lot of these people, when they talk about them, they kind of attach themselves to it, this avatar that we present online, right? So that's one side of the coin. The other side of it, I would say, is when you can get that level of attention and how that might impact the way you actually deal with your people IRL in real life for those relationships, right? I try. I'm not that old. I try my best. But you know, like sometimes we take those experiences with what we see and what we can get, and sometimes that distorts our viewpoint of like when you're actually looking at somebody like I'm looking at you right now and have the ability to talk and get to know that person. Maybe it's giving me an inflated sense of ego, or it's giving me a higher sense of self that maybe I really don't need, and I need to be grounded a little bit. Those are some of the concepts that I like really am trying to analyze and understand. Have you seen or heard or paid attention to anything in that realm?
Yes, and I get it. If we as teenagers had access to people complimenting us all the time, are you kidding me? I would eat that up, fork and knife, every freaking night. I'm so grateful that we didn't have that, because I understand why that's addicting and validating. How insecure was I throughout middle school and high school, etc., if people were telling me, you're great, I'm getting all these likes. Do you remember there used to be a thing on like MySpace days, early Facebook days, where it would be like this and I'll give you a number, I'll rate you or something. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, I did that. More than 3 times, I'm sure. That's horrible. First of all, just to put a person on a number scale is like a whole other conversation. But like, I did that, and if I had the access that kids have now, I can imagine needing that hit, needing that validation.
The dopamine hit.
Yes. So I'm very empathetic to that, and just like you said, nothing is black or white. I think everything's gray. There's pros, there's community, there's validation. It can help with self-esteem, and at the same time, it can do the exact opposite. It can isolate. It can ruin your self-esteem. It can paint a picture of a life that's not achievable for people. And so there's a balance, right? And it comes back to, I feel like everything we're saying just ties back to the beginning of our conversation of boundaries, right? If you care, you set boundaries. And so how is a way that we can take the good and what was the saying? A therapist told me once, take what you need, leave the rest.
Yeah.
And that just resonates in so many aspects of my life on a day-to-day. And I think that's the best way to approach social media. Take what you need, leave the rest.
I agree. And I've met so many wonderful people, honestly, through social media. Even having these discussions. And I see how community can be built, right? You can meet like-minded individuals and really, create some change out here. But yeah, boundaries I'm 100% in favor of. I think that we just need to be more conscious, especially parents. Like, I understand we may not use all this technology, but we need to be aware if our kids want to use it, so that way we understand what appropriate boundaries should be, and we don't get like finessed by them, which can totally happen.
They're so smart.
It's gonna totally happen. There's nothing bad that's happening here. It's like, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So I do think we need to be careful about those things. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think there's going to be those pros that we can take away from it if we choose to utilize them. And even, I remember like a small boundary I did with a client before. They had this thing where they would check Twitter often, and they would sort of get really upset because they would, obviously get a lot of news, I guess, that would come into their feed that would get them irate. And they're like, yeah, and I just can't get off of it. And I think they use this word. I could be making it up. I think they said they hate scrolled or something like that, some word like that on Twitter. And, I was like, yeah, so how about we, and I started looking into like the settings, and I saw like, hey, there's like a timer that you can put on there to kind of limit how much of this you're consuming per day. And it kind of tells you like, hey, you need to get off.
Yes.
And I was like, hey, let's do that. Let's try that. And that really helped them like understand that, hey, I can access it. Cause I was talking to an adult. This wasn't a minor. I can access as much as I want. But I also understand that the impact is it's kind of putting me in a bad mood. The way I'm dealing with other people, it doesn't seem like I'm quite in the best mood, or I'm willing to communicate very well with them. Mm-hmm. And so if I don't take some sort of precaution, like that's going to be more or less my norm. And they were willing to try that, and I saw that that was effective. So that could be like a guardrail, so to speak, whether it's with a minor, if you even want them to access it, or even in this case, an adult.
Yeah, I have a screen time limit on my phone. I can't be on for more than 2 hours a day. I leave my phone in the other room. That's the best way to do it.
Okay.
And I was talking to my cousin over the summer, and he pulled his up, and it was like 18 hours of screen time, and that's the norm for high school. And he was like, 2 hours? How do you get anything done? And I was like, 18 hours? How do you sleep? It's just, it's such a different world. But yeah, the boundaries, the self boundaries.
Those are the differences. And listen, I'm with you. This is, again, this is why we have to talk about these things, because, to me, actually, I get more excited the more difficult that they are. Not because you're always going to have an answer, to be clear. You don't always end every conversation with a very thought out and concrete answer.
Right.
But it's an opportunity to just explore what you think. Right. And then to me, especially, it's like hearing somebody else's perspective. Maybe it affirms what you say, maybe it doesn't. And you have the opportunity to maybe evaluate your position. Maybe you move in a different direction. Maybe you stay where you are. But that's why I like being able to engage in it, because I know that this is very difficult. I know it's very hard for people to say, like, should everybody have access to it? Should nobody have access to it? Should kids have access to it? Should only adults have access to it? Well, is it all good? Is it all bad? No, man. That's all the extreme stuff that we like to put ourselves in, because it's easier to just fall into a camp and ride or die for your camp. Yeah. It's much harder to sit over here and say, there's good over here. I can appreciate those points. There's some points you're making over here. Even if I don't like the majority of other stuff you're talking about, I got to give you credit there. And I like to find those points, because that's where we can have sort of the meeting of the minds. Right. We don't have to just be like extremes dealing with each other. But anyway, moving on. Again, another point and another question that I think you can more uniquely speak on than I can. I've heard a lot of men and women talk about what it's like to try to find somebody that you may want to talk to. You may want to initiate, let's say, the courtship process, right? Mm-hmm. I can only speak from a man's perspective, because I've only ever been a man. Typically, in my experience, and a lot of the men that I've spoken to, it's like we usually initiate contact, right? And so, because I've been hearing more about this out there in different platforms about kind of like what's the right way to do these things. Mm-hmm. So I was very curious, and I wanted to hear from your perspective, not that you're speaking for all women, but just for you. How do you feel like a man, if he was interested in you, how should he approach you?
Yeah, honestly, I love this question, and it really does differ from person to person, right? Because we all have such different personalities, so how we go about things and react to things are just completely different. I do want to preface with, I completely am empathetic to, the standard or the old, more traditional ways of the guy having to approach, and how difficult that must be. And just like rejection sucks. It's very hard.
Nobody likes it.
No, and to put yourself in that situation over and over again is really intimidating, and I have a lot of respect. So I want to preface with that.
Appreciate that.
I have gone up to people myself, and I have been rejected. So again, I just know it can be an ego hit, even if it has nothing to do with you. If their partner's down the aisle and you just didn't see them and they're saying no because they have a partner, still hurts. So just want to say that. For myself personally, I think the best way to approach me is one, just don't touch me, which sounds so weird, but like the amount of people who will just come up and like put an arm on your waist or whatever.
Respect
to like,
boundaries.
Yes, exactly.
Personal
like
space.
That's automatically going to give me the ick, and now we're not off on a good foot.
Gotcha.
So I actually really appreciate opening up a dialogue or a conversation. I have been approached, I think it's normal to go up, oh, you're beautiful. Can I have your number?
Right.
To me, panic. I immediately panic. You can be the most gorgeous human being I've ever seen in my life. I'm panicking. I'm having an anxiety attack. I don't know, even if I want to give you my number, I feel like my safe thing is just to say, oh, I'm sorry, I have a partner, and run. So for me personally, I can see someone who's gorgeous and talk to them for 2 seconds, and now you are so unattractive to me, and vice versa. I have had so many circumstances where someone might not be my type, or I'm not initially attracted to them, but I talk to them and I'm like, oh my gosh, you just shot through the roof.
Continue, but I'm coming back to that point.
Okay, yeah. And it's happened to me so many times, like in friend groups, etc. So to me, if I'm reading a book and you say, oh, like, what are you reading? Like, I'm trying to get into reading, or I'm wearing all yellow and you're like, oh, I heard that brightens your mood. Something that engages a conversation. I think this does 2 things. I think one, it gives us the opportunity to see how we vibe. How is our energy? Can we carry a conversation? Do I feel safe in the conversation? Do I feel intellectually stimulated? And 2, I feel like it gives you the opportunity to pick up on cues that can almost be a buffer to where if you feel like we're not getting it, you just spared yourself a rejection in a weird way, right? Like if you see my body language, the conversation's not going well, you can be like, all right, well, enjoy your book, and you can walk off.
Right.
For me, I feel like my looks are like the least interesting thing about me. Like I have an ego, and so to me, I'm like, I have a lot to offer. Like, challenge me, like get me talking about something, and then if I feel like we click, game over. Now I'll ask you for your number. Oh, we should continue. That's just how I work, and I know not everyone's like that, but I just think it increases our likelihood of getting what we want.
Absolutely. Now so hold on to that thought. I want to take where I was going to go back to.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to put it in this context of online dating.
Okay.
So hold on to what you were just thinking.
Okay.
So where I was going to go back to was you mentioned how you can gain interest after speaking to that person, even if you were not initially attracted to them,
Big
maybe
time.
as physically, right?
Big time.
All right. So with that being the scenario, so online dating, so we don't necessarily get that opportunity to connect in that way, right? A lot of times it can be a lot of us texting back and forth. Maybe you're kind of building up to like a video call for some people. And also because a lot of younger people, they didn't have to do it, I would say, the old school way that I did, which is what you had to actually go up to the person and just talk to them.
So scary.
Yeah. There was no like, I'm going to text you before. It's just, hi. Yeah. And we have to drum up this conversation from somewhere, right?
Right.
Hopefully I don't have a heart attack in the process. But I bring that up because I love what you said. Even if I physically see you, I'm not saying that you were completely unattractive, but you just maybe weren't like the most attractive to me at that time compared to somebody else. But then I got to speak to you, and then I got to learn a little bit about you, and then I saw how you engaged with me, and maybe you had a very inquisitive and good ear.
Yes.
And you were engaging with me in a way that made me feel like you were genuinely seeing me, right? You can't really communicate all of that through online dating. I would really love to hear your opinion before I continue that thought.
Okay, so yes, I completely agree. I put a lot of weight into, so I'm going apps. So we're talking apps now because apps are the new way. Like we're talking Bumble,
the Hinges,
Hinge,
the Bumbles,
right?
Yeah.
I care so much about your profile. I feel like people think I'm joking when I say this. I dissect your profile. I read everything. If the pictures, not so much. I mean, I look at them, but I swipe right really based on your profile. And me and my girlfriends get into this all the time because my girlfriend, she swipes left on everyone. And I said, if that person approached you in Publix, you would be all over it. It's because it's online and you feel that you have a million options and you can yes.
Oh, wait, hold on. Please say that last part again. Please say that last part again.
What did I even say? You feel like you have a million options? Yes. That it's easy to be like, no. But if this person came up to you in Publix and was like, hey, you would go out with them. And I swear, my girlfriend said, yeah, you're right. It's because it's so easy. Okay.
Guys, I hope y'all heard that. So,
yes.
and the reason why I asked you to repeat that point is because, especially in the form of online dating, I do think from what we've seen, there has been research to kind of touch on this, that statistically women are getting the vast majority of the attention, right?
Yeah.
So they have more of the opportunity to do the swiping left because it does feel like there's like an endless plethora of options versus for guys, they can be going on there for days, weeks, months, even years in some cases without feeling like they get a meaningful match or have the opportunity to actually meet up with the person and get to know them. But Please continue.
Yeah, and then I would say another thing I do is I don't do the whole messaging back and forth. I usually engage in a short, brief conversation just to see if like the vibe is right, if we can carry the conversation. Because to me, I'm going to put in effort, so it just has to be matched.
Right.
But my thing is, let's go out, because I feel like you can talk to someone online for weeks, and the second you get in person and that energy is off, right? You know that energy the second they walk in the room. And again, why did we waste so much time? I'm a very efficient kind of girl. So can I cuss on here? I was going to say I'm an efficient bitch. Yes. So like, to me, I don't want to be pen paling with you if we're going to show up and you're not going to talk. You were talking a lot when we were on text, and now we're in person. You got nothing to say. So I am very much your profile. I care what you say, your pictures. I hope you're smiling. And then let's go have coffee. Let's go on a walk. Let's go for a drink, and let's really see how things go. And I've met two of my favorite partner, that sounds horrible, but on apps. And it really was, we talked for 1 or 2 days and went out and hit it off.
I love that. I actually think that that's very refreshing, because a lot of the stories that I hear, it's not exactly like that. I would say you seem to be more of the outlier.
I agree.
Than the norm.
I agree.
And I take that a few different ways. Mainly because, and again, I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, apps are bad or they're evil or something like that. What I do think is kind of like the social media conversation. It's nuanced, right? So if going back to your comment about your friend is just like swiping left all the time, if that's what it seems like, I'm not denying that that's probably what it is, then I could imagine trying to put myself in her shoes, that it's not unreasonable to think like, oh, then I can just pick this picturesque person and I just have to swipe, for a really long time until I find them, right? Like they're kind of like in this stack. If I have a stack of 100 cards of potential suitors, the most ideal one that I want, that not only checks all the boxes but just looks like exactly what I would envision if I had to dream him up, he's there, right? And I just have to keep swiping until I get to him. That's me trying to put myself in a woman's shoes, right? Let me speak for the guy's side. The reason why I asked you to keep repeating those points is because a lot of the men that I speak to, that's not true for us. A lot of us, it is, you're sort of on this island and you're hoping that somebody, wants to even give you the time of day, even when you've put together a thoughtful profile or you put intentional photos and trying to look, visually appealing, which of course is very different than when you talk to the person in real life. And I think it just makes it harder for people to connect. So there's kind of this theme floating around. I was having this conversation yesterday with another guest. It's kind of like, to be so connected as a society, we're also very disconnected. And it seems like an oxymoron, but I actually think it's true.
Yeah.
Because we have all this opportunity to connect, and I think we don't leverage it all to the best, in maybe the best ways that we could. And I think it's also giving us these different complexes that make it harder for us to come together. So when you gave the example of your friend, which I love that example, if I was her, again, if I tried to put myself in her shoes, why do I think that I would want to give the first guy, the 5th guy, the 10th guy, the 20th guy, why would I even give him an opportunity to take me on a date? Why would I even invest in having a call when I know that I have 300 likes, 500 likes, 1,000 messages, however, maybe in that inbox? That's me trying to think from her perspective, to try to say, like, I don't think maybe she's not being completely unreasonable. However, is that perfect guy in the stack? Maybe he's not. Maybe I'm just wishfully thinking because I'm like, well, I look good, I take care of myself, so clearly, like, this guy, this most ideal person I would want, he must be there. But then I'm also eliminating so many good possibilities. Like you were discussing, if he met me in real life and we talked and we were able to engage, maybe the physical appearance wasn't so attractive as much. But once we got to that part, I was able to see the real him, and I'm like, wow, I would have only hoped that I didn't swipe left on that guy, right?
But what's funny is the universe is funny because she's never had a partner. And so her and I have had this conversation so many times where, because I do speak very highly of my past relationships, and she has had this experience where she just swipes left on everyone, and then every once in a while she'll go out and meet someone that she was really excited about, and there's nothing there, right? There's no connection, there's no personality, there's nothing. And you feel like you have all this option, right? All this say at your fingertips, and here we are where, you know, she's never been able to build that connection with anyone. We are adults now, and she's not had a relationship. And so, and she's aware of that. And she's open. I mean, she's brilliant. She's one of my closest friends, and she's very open to it. I really think it's a, like a subconscious, the ease and these apps are designed to be, you know,
I feel like it can be very empowering.
Yeah.
Right. Where you feel like, that's why I said, I try to put myself in you all's shoes, that it could be very empowering. Just be like, yeah, no, like I can do better.
Yeah.
So like, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
But, and I love how you said it, because to me, you sound very grounded when you talk like this, which I really appreciate. These are people.
Yeah.
And you never know. And I'm not suggesting, again, to be clear here, I'm not suggesting that everybody is your ideal partner.
Right.
Because that's obviously not true.
Right.
But maybe we're not giving enough options.
That's the thing.
That chance.
Yes.
To actually see, could this be a sustainable relationship?
Yes.
If we talk about things, again, more intentionally, being more clear, as you eloquently explained earlier. So no need to rehash that. Mm-hmm. I would like to see us get to that point. Yeah. And the reason why I even started asking these questions, and it also was for me, like, I want us to understand, because I want more men and women to come together, to have healthy relationships. I don't like this direction that I feel like we're going in, where it's just like, keep waiting, keep looking, you know, something better is always coming around the corner, instead of, man, but what if I have something great really in front of me that I could take advantage of? I think there always can be that option that you kind of have in the back of your mind, like, maybe I could have gotten something better. Okay, maybe you want that for your ego. But if you can find somebody who's willing, not only matches those clear criteria that you said that you need, right? That we all deep down need, and they're willing to put in the effort, and you're like, you know what? I would like to work on that with them. Why is that so much maybe looked down upon, or not fully appreciated as much as this idea of, well, I can just keep swiping until I find exactly what I want? That to me seems to be like the dilemma. I don't know if you feel differently about that.
Yeah, I almost feel that it's not even that deep for them. We're sitting here and we're like critical thinking about
Right.
like what's really going on, and like this conversation that I had with her, she was really like, you're right, I would have swiped, like if he came up to me, I would have went out. Like, I don't even think there's that much thought into it. I think it's that addiction and that process and that hit of getting liked, and it's the lack of intentionality. But I don't think it's like, oh, I'm just gonna keep finding better. I just think it's the habit of, this is dating now, and I can just keep swiping, and there's always gonna be new profiles, and you know, I just think it's the norm.
Actually, wait, pause on that part, because I like that last part you just said. I wonder if people do really believe that. They think that there's infinite profiles?
Oh, I feel like there are for girls.
Of real people? Of real people.
That's a good point. I don't know.
Not AI, robots,
Right.
and
I don't
fake
know.
profiles. Do they
There's
actually
a
think
lot
it's endless?
of guys on apps.
No, I agree. No.
It feels endless.
I'm 100%. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Is it truly though? And keep in mind, even though that there may be a lot on there, that doesn't mean that you want to entertain it, all of them.
I don't want to entertain a 70th of them.
Right? So
yeah.
I do think that's interesting.
Yeah.
No, I respect that. Maybe, so you're saying it's kind of more mindless.
Yes.
I
think it's very mindless.
Like I'm passing the time.
Yes. Yes.
I could be listening to an audiobook, but I'm gonna swipe right on or swipe left on 50 profiles.
It's the same thing as pulling up your Twitter and endless scrolling, right? And like, I feel like half the time people aren't actually even looking at what's on their feed. It's just picking up the phone, swiping, putting down the phone. It's a process addiction. And so I think it's the same thing with swiping. I'm not gonna lie, there have been times where I'm swiping so fast and I'm like, I just missed the love of my life. You know what I'm saying? Because you get into this like flow, and I do think that is probably the majority of it, sadly.
You gave me this thought now. Maybe, because you said process. Mm-hmm. Maybe because the mechanisms are similar across the dating apps and the social media platforms. The scrolling and the swiping. Not the swiping isn't exact one for one. But maybe there's such a similarity there that it doesn't cause you. Again, we're thinking deep about this. It doesn't cause you to really pay attention to what's on screen before you swipe. Like maybe it wasn't swiping. Maybe you had to. I haven't thought about it this much. There's like another step you had to do to get the person off of your screen, and then maybe it was easier for you to actually swipe right on them, so to speak. So then instead of you doing the same motion, essentially one for one, that kind of mirrors the way people maybe are on Twitter, are on Instagram, are on TikTok, because you are swiping for the most part.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more intuitive for you to just like ignore, as opposed to you, no, okay, I'm gonna sit down. Okay, Marissa just popped up on my phone. Okay, I'm gonna sit down, read her profile. Great photos. What is she about? Okay, cool.
Right.
And then it wouldn't, if it wasn't so easy for me to like get you off of my screen,
no.
maybe I would sit there and be like, no, I want to send a message to her. She seems like she really got some good stuff going on. Maybe from like a process side, or maybe for the people who make these platforms, maybe it would make it easier. Because again, I'm talking about just how do we help create more real connection, where we stop swiping left on each other on whatever platform that you're on, because it seems like the mechanism is pretty much the same.
Well, and interestingly enough, I feel like with guys, they all just swipe right. It's like the opposite.
I think some of that is desperation.
Yeah, but it's
like,
funny
I want to
because
connect with somebody, so I'm just gonna, if I swipe right enough,
something's gonna hit.
Somebody will agree.
and I've heard that. Like I have a friend who said that they just swipe right on everyone, and then when they get the match, then they filter through. Because I will match with some people, and I'll be like, you didn't read my profile. Once we start talking and they'll say something wild and I'll be like, my profile is very clear, you know, like, cause you can have like the LGBTQ plus ally and like BLM and all that kind of stuff. And they'll message me something. I'm like, you did not read my profile. Right. So it's kind of the reverse of that's not intentional. What my girlfriend's doing is not intentional. Right. So I think it's on both sides. Agreed. And everyone's just getting missed.
I agree. And see, and I love and I appreciate being able to talk about this openly, because I think these are the discussions that sometimes we're having amongst ourselves, or maybe amongst a small group. But I think that men and women, we need to more openly talk about this stuff. So again, we can more intentionally try to find each other. Again,
men, have a woman check your profile.
There you go. No, I agree. I think that actually would be helpful if you want to increase the likelihood that somebody would actually want to swipe on you. Don't just throw up pictures and picture of you with glasses or abs or the fish. That will work with some people. I think some people call those chads. Is that the term? Okay. I still don't understand like why we put certain names on certain people, other than like Karen. I got that one. Yeah. I know where that one comes from. But yeah, I just think it's important for us to think about that in a slightly more objective way, so that way maybe we can actually kind of come up with helpful tips, so when people do choose to engage in that particular app, because it does seem like that's the most effective way to meet strangers now,
especially since COVID.
Right. I was gonna say because like we kind of have the death of malls, so we don't really have those town squares and those open spaces where you just randomly would see somebody and you're like, Marissa was going to the movies and I saw her walking with this girl and I was like, man, she looked really nice, and I just want to figure out a way to come approach her. We don't have that anymore. And then you also mentioned COVID, so we went to the other extreme, right, of not being able to have those open spaces to have dialogue. And I think we need to find a way to get to that quickly before we have a lot of lonely and isolated people out there.
It's true.
So, but really, really good topic on that one. All right, so let's continue. But now we're gonna get off the app stuff. Let's talk about expectations. Very important, right? To me, it's a centerpiece of any time you're going to try to go out with somebody, you're trying to entertain somebody. That can be good for the beginning of the courtship process, but then also even once you're in a relationship, expectations will somewhat evolve, right? Because we're evolving throughout the relationship, right, as people. How do you feel that you do in terms of describing what you need from a partner?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes from like that initial screening process. I feel like my expectations are to be matched. So I don't have any expectations of things that I cannot provide myself. And I really stand by that. I cannot stand when people say, I expect this. And I'm like, but you don't have that.
Respect.
Right? Like that makes no sense. And so my expectations are I'm going to show up. And I'm going to be authentic, and I'm going to put my energy in, and I'm going to be caring and thoughtful and intentional, and that is what I expect. And my expectations have formed and evolved over the years because of my previous experiences and my previous relationships, right? I know that my expectations are not unrealistic because they've been met multiple times before. And so that validates that my expectations are not crazy, are not unreasonable. And if someone is not able to match it, that's not a me problem, that's an us problem, a compatibility problem, and keep it moving.
Okay. Can you give me some examples of some of the things that are really important to you?
Yeah, so I hate to tie it to like love languages, but like my main one is like acts of service, right? And so I will go above and beyond to like, if you're running around crazy today and I know you needed to pick something up from the pharmacy, like I'm going to do that to show you I'm here to support you. And like, that is what I expect, right? Back. I don't want to have to say it. What drives me insane in a relationship is feeling like I'm dating someone who needs directions on how to be a partner. I just want an adult to show up as their whole selves and do what they would want done to them and care for someone like you would care for someone that you love. I don't want to have to give instructions and directions on simple things like that, right? I don't want to have to say, can you? I just want someone who just does, right? Like, because that's how I am. I love to plan a trip. I love to plan a date night. I love to do things. And I want a partner who does that as well, so that I don't feel like I'm taking on like a motherly role of my partner.
I get that. Okay. Let me throw a slight curveball at you, but I do agree with that last part in particular. Because I think that when you are going to be intentional, when your partner is too, they're going to pick up on things and how you tend to like things to be done and try to match that, right? And I think you would naturally do that as well. The only curveball I would throw at you, because you mentioned love languages, which I actually think can be useful information. I don't think that they're like 100% spot on for everybody, right? but I do think it could be valuable information. Yeah. So you talked about like you prefer acts of service, right? So it means people doing things for you and it makes you feel like valued, loved, and appreciated. I am a physical touch and quality time number one,
right?
Because to me that's just the best currency that any of us have to be able to offer to somebody. But my point is that obviously, let's say it was me and you, so we would have different ways on how we would see that. How do you feel about, okay, if I know that the person I'm dealing with has a different way in how they express it, or at least how they would receive that, do you feel like you would choose to match that, or you would expect them to just see it the way that you see it?
No, absolutely. It's about matching, right? And all my previous partners, those are their two love languages. I feel like that's like the man love language, is this quality time and physical touch. I don't want to spend time. I'm like it's so awful. I get it from my mom. We're like, don't touch me. I don't want to be around you. I'm not quality time, but when I'm in relationships, I make that a priority because that is what my partner needs, right? We're meeting each other together where we need to be met. And so it's something to, are you willing to make the effort? Are you willing to try, right? We're not going to be perfect at everything right away. Sure. But that quality time, again, is not something like I could be alone every single day, see you once a week, and feel like we are doing great, loving it. And all of my partners, like they every day. And so I had to get comfortable with, again, boundaries, right? I'll see you like 4 days a week. I'm going to make that effort, but also when it's me time, right? And finding that middle ground. But you have to be willing to put in the effort because I am, and that's the meeting halfway part.
Okay, I got you. No, and I agree with that part. That I wanted to make sure, because I know some people, they have the idea of like, well, this is how I do things, so if you're going to come try to join my train, then you need to adhere to my principles. No,
you have to love people how they want to be loved, or else it's not love.
I agree. I wanted to clarify that, and also because I want the audience to catch that too. So when you see it differently, that's not a bad thing. But if you want to put in the effort and you want them to feel appreciated in whatever way that it is that they love to feel that, then you're going to try to match the way that they hopefully tell you.
Right.
So like, for example, if we're dating you, like, maybe we're going to take the quiz and like, I'm going to show you and we're going to explain it. Like, this is what acts of service means. And this is how I interpret it. And then these are the things that make me feel special. Right. And so then over time, I'm understanding that, I'm seeing, and then I'm trying to embody that. So it can get to a point where it's reflexive. But it wasn't reflexive because I wasn't innately understanding that's because you taught me that and you helped me see it from your perspective. And then vice versa. I'm telling you those things about me, and then you're putting in the effort to try to match me in the way that I prefer to receive that.
And it can change over time. And that's why it's important. And the communication is important, because you can be quality time, this year. And in 2 years, you might really switch over. And now you're acts of service. You see me do, you were doing all these things for me. You're like, shit, that might be nice. Yeah. Now I'm acts of service, right? And so that communication and adapting, I think one of the hardest things in a relationship is when you disagree or when things are different, it's like, it has to be a problem. Whereas we can just be two different people, and we can respect each other for that. Right. And where can we meet and where can we align? I think if we disagree and our partner, we don't see eye to eye, it almost feels like personal. Like,
Person was like,
well, how can you feel this way, right? And then you just beat it and you beat it and you beat it.
Like, don't change.
Right. But that's not what a relationship is about. The relationship is about two individuals, two complete adult individuals with their own lives and their own perspectives coming together, respecting one another, and wanting to have a partnership.
I agree. All I can do is second what you just said, because I think it's so important. Like you have to understand that anytime you decide to make that willful connection and opportunity to be with somebody, that number one, you got to start looking outside of you. I usually talk a lot about bias, particularly when it comes to communication, for whatever relationship type you're talking about, because we all operate seeing the world from our vantage point, right? But when I decide to be with you, I have to understand that you don't see the world the way that I do. So I need to try to understand how you do see it and make it easier for us to find ways to communicate effectively together, where we're not seeing ourselves as opposition or antagonizing one another. But how do we create, as you said, alignment? We both sort of want the same things. Maybe we thought we had different paths on how we were going to get there. So I also talk a bit about having a shared vision for the future. So if you want to have that longevity, and it may change over time, that's totally fair. But the point is that if I understand that you want this thing and I want this thing, and so we have that together, our approach may be different, but we're going to figure out how do we mutually make that work for us together. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you know what it is. It's seeing the relationship and you and your partner as the team. And this is something that I've struggled with personally in my relationships. And I can hear my ex now saying, we're a team. Like, why do you keep forgetting we're on the same side, right? And that's how a true team, I don't do sports, but sports reference for you all. That's how a true team works. You're going to have different methods and different skills, right, on the courts or whatever y'all play on. But the end goal is the same. And you can still have respect for the way they play the game and your differences. But at the end of the day, you're a team. You care for one another and you have that same shared vision. And that's back to, are we aligned with our values and our goals? That's the most important part for compatibility. All the rest, we can learn and we can grow and we can adapt if we're looking at that same goal.
No, I agree. And that's exactly why I think once you initially screen out sort of those people who don't have those things that come with you, then it's like easier to then craft what that vision would be, right? You probably have already started to discuss it a bit in the initial conversations, right? And then you just say like, hey, how do you feel about this? Like, I have a different approach on how I want to get there, but I know that I want these things. I know that I want to be married. I know I want a wife. I know that I want possibly 2 kids, right? And then I'm asking you about these things, and you're like, yeah, I definitely want the same things. That we got to figure out timing and so on and so forth as we continue to build the relationship together. But we have a basic framework. So I like to try to say that in that way, because I think a lot of times we don't create that. And then we're kind of surprised that like we're not going anywhere. And I'm like, it's like if you just jumped in the car, no navigation and no destination in mind. That's cool sometimes if you just want to be present focused. Cool, you can be mindful. But when you're talking about for the future, you can mindfully drive. But when you're thinking about the future, like you need to have some basic structure, some basic strategy of how am I going to get to where I want to go? Number one, where do I want to go? So that I can communicate that effectively to you. So I can ask you, how do you feel about that? What do you want? Making sure we both want those same things. And then when we have this basic idea, it helps us feel confident that we are to be able to integrate our lives together, which is the other step, depending on how long you go. So I know that, again, those are very, not necessarily complex ideas, but it is complicated to actually put it into action. But I think the more that we talk about that openly, then hopefully this puts us on people's minds. So maybe if they're in a relationship, you're thinking, I haven't had that conversation with my partner yet, then you should. Right. And if I am getting ready today and I'm thinking about going out there, start incorporating that into the initial courtship process when you're going to talk to a young man or a young woman.
Yeah, and it can be uncomfy. You know, and I swear my sister hates me because she always calls me, and she's married, her husband, I love him more than life itself. They've been together for maybe 6 years. I consider him a best friend, and she'll call and she's complaining, and she's ready for me to be like, screw him, like charge on, at Knight's reference. And I will really say like, well, and she will at first get upset, and then she'll be like, you're arguing for the team. because I know that they both want to be married. And so what I'm arguing for is the marriage. I'm not arguing for her. I'm not arguing for him. I'm just saying, how can we find the median? How do we find the middle ground? Because what I care about is that you both want to be married, and that's the bigger picture.
Right.
It drives her crazy.
But you know what? But I respect that though. It's putting the we before the me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Simply said, but again, sometimes it's hard to keep that in mind when we're getting in our own feelings, and sometimes we don't want to listen, sometimes we don't want to communicate. Yeah. But to me, that's what it takes.
Right.
And not that this is a PSA for relationships, but I will say life is already very hard. Hopefully you would agree. I think it's even harder when you go through it for a large period of time alone. Mm-hmm. And again, when I say alone, I don't mean that you don't have family or friends. I mean somebody that you want to build with. Right. And I'm not suggesting that some people don't want to do that. Maybe there are some. But I also believe that the vast majority of humans, if not all, we have some level of socialization that we want to be able to engage with. And in order to be able to do that, I have to start to learn some of these basic skills. If I don't, maybe I need to touch up or refine them if I'm kind of rusty. But I think these are things that are essential if you want to build to whatever that long-term relationship is for you. Mm-hmm. So. And
it's hard work, and the whole relationship will be hard work. So it's good to understand that from the forefront.
It is. But you know what? I would still make the argument personally, no matter how difficult it is, I personally think it's worth it. Yeah. I think it's better than trying to do life by yourself.
Better have loved and lost than to never have loved at all.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Especially when you talk about family dynamics, and you have children. It's way easier when you have. There's a reason why children turn out better when they have two parents involved, whether they live together or not, than one. Because it's just hard. Mm-hmm. You just got to do the math, man. Mm-hmm. Financially, it's difficult. Time-wise, it's difficult. You're only one person.
Right.
When you got the other person, it's like I can lean on you. Mm-hmm. So anyway, all right. We're getting towards the tail end of the conversation, but I want to ask you again. So thinking about the idea of if you're in a relationship already, right? What are some thoughts about any particular situation or circumstance that if it were to happen, you feel like this is my either deal breaker, my breaking point where I can no longer stay in this relationship?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this. Sure. I also, I think there are a lot of things. So this is trickier for me because I'm definitely not your poster child on, sticking through the really tough times.
That's okay.
I am great at leaving, but I will say, again, I've had good relationships. I don't regret any of them. And I feel like I made the right decision each time by leaving. I think there are a few big things for me. Mm-hmm. One is, feels so obvious, right? The honesty. I think even if they're little lies, if they just keep happening, to me, it almost feels like there's a level of trust missing, not from me to them because they're lying, from them to me. If I feel like someone keeps lying to me, it feels like, why do you not trust me to hold the truth? It almost feels like you're trying to, it feels disrespectful, like you don't think I can handle it in a sense. Mm-hmm. And I just feel if you can lie frequently about little things, the big things, right, then you can lie about. And I feel like I'm an open book and I'm very honest. And so when I feel like someone isn't giving me that same effort back, right, and is really, it's not easy to be honest all the time. It's really freaking hard. And it's a part of growing up and learning that, like, if you care about this person, they deserve your honesty. And so again, that whole matching, if it's not being matched, that's a reason to leave.
Respect.
I would also say, I feel like everyone always says infidelity. Personally, I don't know that that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, obviously, I think it would be a problem, and I totally understand why people leave. Mm-hmm. I just think everyone has different values and different experiences, which makes them hold things with a different weight.
Correct.
So for me, I've grown up with a lot of financial insecurity, and finances are very important to me. I've worked very hard to get to where I'm at and to be comfortable and to provide for myself. And so a financial betrayal, oddly enough, I think would impact me more than maybe a physical betrayal. I think I've just also had a different experience with the physicality part of relationships, having started dating so young. I know a world in which something can just be physical, and so I would be more hurt from a emotional infidelity than a physical one, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, because that to me is you're missing something emotionally, an intimacy, a vulnerable, emotional, psychological connection that is the most important thing to me in a relationship. So if you're seeking that elsewhere, that is the biggest betrayal, I'd say. So yeah, financial, if you were like lying about your finances, stealing money, something like that, that would really impact me, especially if we're trying to build a life together, right? Because it's supposed to be both of us putting in that effort. And so if it came out that you were being shady about something, that would be difficult for me.
Okay. No, and I think that that's fair. I actually would make the point that I've thought about in recent years that if you're going for the traditional perspective, that a woman essentially is going to be, not that she's a wholly dependent, but she's definitely going to care about your level of financial stability within yourself, because to a certain degree, she, and I think it does go both ways, but for the most part, I would say, I think she's sort of betting on you, that you have your stuff together, that you know the direction that your life is going to go in, because she may not want to work for the rest of her life, or she may not want to work as hard the rest of her life, if she knows that that level of stability can be maintained, that you are sound-minded, that you've demonstrated it, throughout maybe a few years. And I think that provides that level of comfort for a lot of women out there that may seek that out. But at the same time, like you talked about stealing money, I absolutely agree. Like that to me is an absolute no-go. You can't trust it. You can't trust if you're doing it, especially if you're trying to build a life together. But I really want to go back to, because I like the way you gave the nuanced answer, physical versus emotional infidelity. And obviously we don't always define these things. So I think that's also important. Like in your relationship, you need to define these terms, because everybody doesn't come into them with the same definition. That's very important. But you did. So you mentioned, so maybe there's something emotional missing from the relationship. I don't want you seeking that out elsewhere, because that's going to sting and hurt and probably cause a lot more damage. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Versus physically, you're like, that doesn't necessarily reflect as poorly upon you or as on the relationship. And I actually think that makes more sense to me. It's not a PSA to go do it. Right. So I'm not trying to give people a license, right? Because that's something like you guys talk that out and figure out what works for you. But I am saying, I think from a nuanced perspective, the way you lay that out there, I can appreciate that. I think the emotional side is something that even men, we notice that if we see that like our woman's getting like distant from us, and maybe she used to talk to us about things and now she's not. And if you find out that she has like a male friend that she's starting to talk about these things, I think our sort of territorial nature is absolutely going to kick into overdrive and be like, why are you telling him these things? Like, I'm your partner. You should be talking to me about it. Mm-hmm. I don't know why you feel like that's appropriate, but that's not okay. And I can imagine, based on what you said, a woman might feel the same way. I don't want you confiding in her. If you have issues, I want you to come talk to me, especially if it has to do with me, right? I want you to come talk to me about it. Let us try to figure that out. If it was maybe family or like a loved one, maybe there's a little more leeway depending on the relationship. But you're talking about like maybe a colleague, a coworker, high school friend, whatever. I absolutely agree with you. I think that can cause immense damage and can actually set up, from a man's perspective, can set you up for physical infidelity. Because now you're starting to develop a real connection. So then that kind of starts to pull you away from your partner, and it starts maybe making you entertain the idea of being with this new person.
Yeah. And I think really it differs from person to person, because for people who did not have the experience that I had growing up, sex can mean a lot. It can mean everything. And so it is very valid that for some people, if you are physically unfaithful once, it's over. And hey, power to you. It's what the parameters you set in your relationship should be respected. And if it's not respected, do what you got to do, boo. That's just how, I perceive it, to where I can much easier wrap my mind around y'all were out drinking one night and you made a bad mistake and you're never going to do it again. I'd be more forgiving of that than if it's an emotional infidelity. I'm assuming that there is time being put into it, right?
Right?
And that's what it is. It's the time that's being spent away in a different, away from me. And another thing I will comment on, with the financial thing is, again, just varies so much person to person, because growing up, you can ask my whole family, I always thought I would be the breadwinner. And I said the only way I will have children is if my partner is a stay-at-home father. So I was always the reverse. And I always felt like I want to be the stable one and the grounded one because I can depend on myself. I was never comfortable with the idea of putting all of your just the risk of depending on another person. So it doesn't matter if I'm dating a woman, if I'm dating a man, that doesn't matter. I trust myself more than I trust anyone else. And so I was really raised in, you provide for yourself. Whereas, so my perspective is, for me, it's not even necessarily his stability. I mean, I've dated broke musicians. I've dated the brokest of the broke. I've dated very rich people. That's not about, as long as I'm good, it's the lying that gets me. Whereas I think, to your point, like, my sister wants to be a stay-at-home mom. So like in the example you described, that would make more sense in her circumstance, right? To where she wants to be shown that you're honest and have that stability so that she can have that. That's not even what it is for me. Sure. It's more so just the honesty and my personal relationship with finances that come from my childhood.
Okay. No, and I think that that's absolutely fair. I mean, it's based on, what we live, what we experience. I mean, even for me, I would say financial stability is very important to me because we didn't grow up, that well off financially. And so I know that I definitely took on that responsibility very seriously, of trying to be a saver and learn to be an investor and learn to plan ahead for things and not be like an impulsive spender, so to speak. And then as I've gotten older, I've also thought, if I wanted, just speaking from my perspective, and for a lot of guys that I have spoken to, like, if I want a woman to depend on me, number one, I must be dependable.
Right.
So there must be aspects about the way I carry myself that kind of give the impression, honestly, that you can bet on me, because I carry myself in such a way that I know that it is a lot for somebody to want to put that, not the onus, but to put that level of trust into you to say, like, you're going to help make sure the ship stays upright, right? We're not going to fall into ruin. And I know that, like you said, everybody's going to have different outlooks on that. But I think for those of us that do subscribe to that, do want that, then we need to make sure that we're doing absolutely our part. Number one, to walk the walk, and then be able to embody that and demonstrate that to somebody so that they can see that and hopefully feel confident in you, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. And if I can just say, I mean, I cannot imagine being in a more vulnerable position. So I think also just understanding that, like, even myself, like, gender aside, if you and I both plan on being the successful one, the financially stable one, sure, right? Like, the amount of vulnerability for someone to financially depend on you, that is debilitating. If for any reason you or myself switch up, they have nothing. Right. The weight of that, I think we have to be conscientious of and, like, sure, carry with us on a day-to-day, because that is so much trust that human being is putting into us, and it doesn't always work out well.
Oh, of course. Of course.
And so respecting that level of vulnerability that they're showing up to the relation, it's not as simple as just like, I'm just going to sit back and they'll pay for everything. Like, that is a level of giving yourself up, that we should really respect, No,
I agree. And I would add something to that. Even if I had somebody, let's say, that was dependent on me, like not a child, a partner, I would think, this is my opinion, I would want to prepare them for the eventuality of me not being here.
Exactly.
Right? So, like, I would not want somebody, I would be fine with the depending on me part. I'm okay with that. I feel like I was raised for that. But I would want to know, for me, it's big on kind of like, even from a parenting perspective, I want to know that you're going to be okay when I'm not here. And so, to me, like, that's that middle ground that I would walk, to say, to try to calm those concerns that you may have about if I left you, or what the situation may be. Like, number one, I want you to be good, right? I want you to be okay, and I want to put certain conditions in place so that if that unfortunate time does happen, you're not feeling completely blindsided as if you have no idea what to do.
And a lot of people don't think like that, and that is really scary.
Yeah.
That's really scary. I can't imagine anything scarier. I mean, I just think about my own life and, like, I have to have 4 months rent put in my savings because I could lose my job tomorrow, right? And like, if you don't come from a family that can just hand you $10,000 to, like, which most of us don't,
no,
I would be so terrified and emotionally distraught that it holds weight.
Absolutely. I will say one more thing on this idea. I have this kind of concept that I try to implement, and when we talk about things like independence, right? And I use the term interdependence, and I say it because, just to kind of like lay the quick foundation, my expectation when I'm dealing with an adult of whatever age is that there's certain things that you're going to kind of have together, that you're going to know how to provide for yourself, you're going to know how to cook for yourself, you're going to know how to clean for yourself, you know how to pay bills, right? Independence. To me, that is a starting point.
Right.
That's not the ceiling.
That's
just
the bar.
Right. You got to at least hit that.
Yes.
But when I think sometimes when people say that, they say that as if I should, if I'm going to allow you to be in my life, you need to firmly fit into this idea and this mold that I've already created. And what I think would help us maybe a little bit more is that understanding, number one, if I am independent, which again, for me, I would presume that everybody would be right off the bat, I can do these things without you.
Right.
To be clear. Right. And like both parties saying that this is my butt. However, it would be easier for me to do these things with you. It would be easier in my life. There's things that you're going to be better at. There's things that I'm going to be better at. It would be easier for me and us collectively to play off of each other than if I always had to do everything by myself. Can I do it? To me, it's not the question.
Right.
If I'm independent, I can find a way to do it. Both sides. Is that maybe the best way for it to be done? To me, is the question I would ask. And that's why I present it in the idea of us building off of each other, because interdependence means I know I could do it, but maybe you're better at it. I know I could do this by myself, but I would rather have that help, because it really is a huge inconvenience. And you being able to, willing to step up and do that, oh my God, you're alleviating so much from me. I greatly appreciate you. I would rather us come from that perspective than only that, well, you know, I got my own stuff going on, so if you can't add to me, it's like whatever. Which is, I'm not saying everybody's saying that, but I hear a lot of that. So I'm trying to, in my own way, counter that narrative and say, listen, as we've already established, life is already going to be hard, period. End of story. But if I have somebody there that's willing to work with me and do things with me, and we play off of each other, it will inevitably make life easier. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, of course. I think it's the two adult, mature, independent human beings coming together and being intentional about being in a partnership. I don't agree with the whole, you know, my other half. Like, no, you're a whole, right? And he's a whole, and you're gonna come together. And I'm 5'2". If someone can reach that shit on the top shelf, hey, please don't let me pull out my stool. I have my stool in my kitchen. If you can help with that, that's fantastic. I could do it. I've been climbing on my countertops, you know, for however long I've been alive. But like, yeah, that would be great. But yeah, if you're not there, I can get it done. And because you are here, life can be easier.
There we go. That's the point that I'm trying to say, is that I know that I think because sometimes I think people, they kind of take that part of the conversation out of context, because then it almost like a slight. Oh, so you're saying I can't do it? And I'm like,
yeah, I can.
And I'm trying to establish it as like, no, we've already established right off the bat, you can do it. Right. I can do it. That's not even, to me, that's not even the part that's up for debate.
Right.
But when you're thinking about a lifetime of going through things, of life throwing stuff at you, of minor inconveniences that sometimes can be major inconveniences. Yeah. Would I rather have somebody there that I not only want to build with, that I want to communicate with, that I want to share with, and that can do things that I'm not great at, because we are not great at everything. And they're not great at certain things, and we can build off of each other. Would that not be easier and maybe wiser than only looking at it from a, well, you need to get on my way of thinking, and I'm going to be able to do everything on my own, so there may not be really much for you to add to my life.
Right. Well, a relationship is entirely about compromise, and just going in with that attitude, it's going in with the attitude that I'm not going to compromise, so then you're never going to be in an effective relationship.
Facts. Big facts, Marissa just said. I agree. Compromise is probably one of the most important terms that we all need to be thinking about, precisely because we don't look at things the same way, right? And we need to be able to come to this place where I can present my position, you can present yours, and I'm trying to figure out, and you're trying to figure out, how do we come together? Not, you're my opposition, I don't like what you said, so if I can't get you and finagle you into coming to my way, then I'm going to table it, pretend it didn't happen, or we're just going to be distant now.
Right.
Right.
And compromise. I mean, you're going to get to a solution, and no one should leave 100% happy.
No, by definition, compromise.
Right,
you do not,
exactly.
You do not get.
And then you've done it effectively, and you will have a long-lasting relationship.
Yes. Okay. So on that beautiful note, we're coming to a close now. So I want to talk, and I want to end listening more to you and talking about what you want and aspire for the future. And you can answer that however you want to.
Can I go anywhere with this question?
Sure.
I have big hopes and dreams. No, honestly, it changes every day, every month, every year. I've always been this way. I kind of go where the wind blows me. I've been very mental health privileged. I mean, I've definitely had my bouts of depression, etc. But like on the most of the time, I am happy and energetic. I wake up and I get out of bed and I'm excited to start my day. And so I am a content person. So
Beautiful.
Anything in life that really can be thrown at me, it usually I can handle it and things go well. So I have had my life plans change every hour. As of 3 days ago, I'm pretty sure I'll be moving to DC within these next few years. I'm just down. I travel all the time. I think career-wise, I love what I do. I do consulting, and I work in research, data analytics. I would love to do that in the justice system. I've always been really passionate about prison reform, if that's even a thing. And just
I would like to believe that it is.
Right.
I want it to.
Yeah, that's like, it's something I've always loved and have been passionate about. So I would love to do what I do in that realm.
Okay.
I do want a lifelong partner. I've never wanted kids.
Okay.
Kids are not something that has ever interested me, but partnership, long-term partnership is something that I'm seeking. What that may look like, totally open.
Sure.
The only expectations I have, right, are what I've shared with you is just a partner who's going to show up, meet me, and bring the same energy. I'm likely not going to want to sit still in life, so I'm not a white picket fence kind of girl. I want a sky rise in a city, with someone who can park my car. So I mean, but I'm open. I'll just see where life goes. My sister wants to start a family, and that is probably what I'm most excited about. I'm auntie vibes. Like, I don't want to kid myself, but I want to take her kid's going to be my kid. I'm essentially like, I'm the third parent.
But I can drop you off.
Right. Exactly. And so that'll be my role. I'm already thinking like, I got to get a college fund for this kid that doesn't exist yet. But yeah, I just want to keep every day just trying to grow and be better. The more you learn, the less you know. And I'm just so interested in exploring, traveling, and meeting interesting people.
Absolutely. You're ripping my ideas now.
What do you want to do?
I mean, I would say majority of what you said. The only difference is I would not mind the white picket fence.
Right.
Only because not on some Brady Bunch and Family Matters, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air type stuff. But I just I know that that's something that being very family oriented has always been important to me. Like I said, I've had 2 big sides of my family, so I'm just kind of used to being around a lot of people, and I've genuinely enjoyed that. I kind of I think I like the idea of like the kids scurrying down the stairs, and you're just like, even though it's annoying at times, you're like, yeah, I want to make waffles, and let's just go and like read the paper and let's watch a show. And
you are the norm.
Yeah,
I am the lone wolf.
I like that stuff, but
Right.
also thinking about like what comes after that, right? They're grown and then they live their life, and then what do you do? Like, then not even that you have to wait till then, because I'm not doing that now, but you travel, see the world, meet interesting people, hopefully doing more of this, bringing more awareness, helping people come together, being less isolated. Yes, trying to do whatever we can to be a positive force for good, and whatever space or arena you want to be in. But regardless, I very much appreciate everything that you've put out here. I think that it never like ceases to amaze me anytime I get to have these discussions, because I think for those of us that do this type of work, and where you do get to talk to so many different people all the time, you see so much similarities. You see a lot of commonalities that other people don't know, because they're just, maybe you work with data, maybe you work with a small team, and you don't really get to get these wide, varied types of folks that you get to have these experiences with and really hear what they're about and where they came from.
We are so much more alike than we are different.
Right.
I say it all the time.
And I agree. But when you don't talk to them, like, you don't know, right? Again, judgments, we just go based on what we see.
Yeah.
So I'm always hoping that anybody who watches or listens to these, like, really understands that there's a lot more things that you might find in common with other people. Like, don't be afraid. Please speak up. Please make sure that, that you're taking good care of yourself, like you discussed. Obviously, mental health, emotional health, very important. I always say to the men out there, because for so many of us, it's really not taught. And for many of us, we feel like it's not important. I can assure you it is. Particularly if you want to be in a relationship with a woman, it's been my experience. They want to talk about these things. So you need to learn how to do it. Yeah. But also just hoping that people get a little bit of a challenge, maybe when they hear some of these stories and recognize there's some things that I haven't dealt with, and perhaps hearing Marissa talk about this part of her story or hearing me bring up something, I recognize I need to do something about it so that I can be in a healthier position when I want to go through the courtship process, to filter through these people or to present my most authentic self and hopefully give them a complete picture of like what I'm about and what I want. But we got to start doing the work. I'm going to make one last point. We don't have to wait until we're in the relationship to work for a relationship. We can do the work now. Right?
Go to therapy, boys.
Right. You can learn before you even get in a relationship, before you even get in these situations. But I think in a lot of situations that I've seen is that people kind of feel like more pressure once they have somebody there. And they're like, oh, okay, well now I need to be doing this, and that. But that might be too late, right? Yeah. Like I'm not saying it because I want it to be true. I'm just saying that's what I've observed. And I think the earlier that we engage in these discussions, if we're being more intentional in how we approach these things, more often than not, people will either make them work or they won't maybe get so invested into a situation that they really have no business in. That's a big one. Yeah. I think we'll generally be happier and more fulfilled. So,
yeah, and it's not even, it's not even individuals' faults, right? Like the society is changing, and historically there has been more pressure on the financial aspect of things, right? Today we really are seeking that emotional intelligence and that emotional intimacy, and it is not what most of our men have been raised with and taught how to do. It is a skill. It is something that takes practice, and the times are changing, and it's understandable, why you have not necessarily developed these skills, but it's also a call for action. Yes. That if you want to develop that emotional intimacy with a partner, these are the expectations that have to be met to achieve that.
Absolutely. And that's why we're here. Yeah. Because I also want to be representation. I want to be an example. I also try to make this point about, even if we have differing viewpoints, right? Being able to visualize and see respectful discourse. Right. So we can talk, we may not share every single same viewpoint, and that's okay.
We never will.
Right, and that doesn't mean we need to mistreat one another. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, I think it helps us really learn how to, again, navigate what healthy relationship building looks like. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to have two different people who have those different viewpoints. We have to find ways to not only share our points, respect theirs, and in some cases, come together. We talked about compromise. That's very important. So sometimes this might be somebody's example that they're not getting anywhere else. That's another thing that I think about. So I'm trying my best to put these together so people can see it, understand that it is possible, it is practical, and it is needed if you want the type of outcomes that you and I are describing. So regardless, again, thank you for everything that you've shared today. I think that this was more than fulfilling in terms of a discussion, and everything that you have been able to give insight in your unique lived experience on. I hope for those of you that may have watched this and listened to this, if you've gotten some value from it, please consider subscribing and helping to push this content, because, man, let me tell you, it does take a lot of effort to do this, but I always appreciate being able to have the discussion, because I know that for some of you, you may not hear this discussion anywhere else. And so I hope that if you want to hear more stuff like this, please help us push and promote more of this as we continue down this path. But until next time, we're going to sign off from ourselves. So,
all right, thank you.
Peace out.